Chapter 1. The Salt-Stained Arrival. The ferry lurched, a groan of stressed metal protesting against the choppy gray water. Lyssa Chen pressed her forehead against the cool, damp glass of the portal window, watching the island solidify from the mist. It rose abruptly from the sea, a jagged silhouette of dark rock fringed with stunted, wind-lashed trees. No beaches softened its edges. Cliffs plunged straight into the churning surf. A single structure broke the uniformity of the skyline, a blocky, utilitarian complex perched precariously close to the northern cliffs, its smoke-gray walls streaked with rust or grime, impossible to distinguish at this distance. That had to be it. Viridian Dynamics Assembly Plant 7. Her stomach churned, mimicking the boat's unsteady rhythm. Nerves, she told herself. Nerves and the rancid smell of diesel fumes mixed with the cloying sweetness drifting from a crate of bruised fruit near the companionway. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The recruitment brochure had shown pristine labs, smiling workers in bright uniforms, modern dormitories. It promised competitive wages, room and board included, a 6-month contract on a pioneering materials project. A chance to save money, a clean break, maybe even find a lead on Leo. Her brother had chased a similar advert 6 months prior, a different company name but the same vague promises of cutting-edge work on a remote facility. His messages, once weekly, had dwindled to silence 2 months ago. Official channels yielded nothing. This long shot, this job at Plant 7, was the only thread she had left. The ferry's horn blasted, a mournful sound swallowed by the vastness of the ocean and the island's oppressive presence. Other passengers, mostly men with rough hands and weathered faces, began gathering their meager belongings, their expressions ranging from stoic indifference to poorly concealed apprehension. Lyssa clutched her worn duffel bag tighter. Its contents were sparse. Changes of clothes, basic toiletries, a faded photo of her and Leo grinning beneath a summer sky, and the Viridian Dynamics contract, its clauses dense and unsettlingly vague about the exact nature of the work. The dock was a crude affair, weathered wooden pylons supporting a narrow concrete platform slick with sea spray and guano. A man stood waiting as the ferry crew wrestled with thick mooring ropes. He was immense, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, encased in a heavy-duty dark gray work uniform stained with unidentifiable substances. His face was a mask of hardened flesh, eyes narrowed against the wind, scrutinizing each disembarking passenger. This must be the foreman, Grotesque, mentioned in the final travel instructions. New arrivals this way. His voice was a gravelly bark that cut through the wind. He didn't wait for confirmation, turning his wide back and stomping towards a steep, switchbacking path carved into the cliff face. Keep up. Transport waits for no one. Lyssa fell in line with the others, the climb immediately taxing. The air was thick with the smell of brine and something else, an acrid chemical tang overlaid with a faint, sickly sweet undertone like spoiled plastic. The path was uneven, loose scree shifting underfoot. No guardrails offered security against the sheer drop to the jagged rocks below, where waves exploded in plumes of white foam. She kept her eyes fixed on the boots of the person ahead, forcing herself to match their pace. The transport turned out to be a battered, windowless truck, its sides caked with mud and salt residue. The cargo area was fitted with hard metal benches. Grix slammed the heavy rear doors shut after the last worker scrambled inside, plunging them into near darkness. The only light came from thin cracks around the door frame. The truck engine roared to life, settling into a rattling, bone-jarring journey over what felt less like a road and more like a boulder field. Conversation died quickly, replaced by the groaning engine and the clang of metal on metal. Lyssa braced herself against the wall, the photo of Leo a hard rectangle against her ribs. What kind of place was this? The journey ended with a screech of brakes and another door slam, Grix opening the back. They emerged blinking into a concrete courtyard surrounded on three sides by the main factory building. It was even more imposing up close. Sheer, windowless walls pierced only by large loading bay doors and ventilation grills humming with hidden machinery. Surveillance cameras mounted high on the walls tracked their arrival. The air here was heavier, the chemical smell stronger, stinging the nostrils. "All right, listen up," Grix commanded attention, his gaze sweeping over the group. "Welcome to Veridian Dynamics Plant 7. You're here to work. 6-month contract, non-negotiable. Rules are simple. Follow instructions, meet your quotas, stay out of restricted areas. Curfew is 2200 hours. Lights out at 2300. Mess hall serves 3 meals a day. Miss them, you go hungry." He pointed towards a squat, separate building. "Dormitories, Block C. Assign yourselves a bunk, stow your gear. Shift briefing in Assembly Hall Beta at 600 tomorrow. Don't be late." He didn't ask for questions. He didn't offer any further welcome. He simply spat on the concrete, turned, and lumbered towards one of the massive factory entrances, disappearing inside without a backward glance. The group dispersed hesitantly towards Block C. The dormitory was as grim as the exterior suggested. Long, narrow rooms lined with triple-tiered metal bunks. Thin mattresses covered in stained gray fabric. Shared washroom facilities at the end of the corridor. The air hung stale and damp. Lyssa found an empty top bunk in a room already housing 5 other silent, grim-faced women. She pushed her duffel bag beneath the metal frame, the picture of Leo digging into her side again. This wasn't a research facility. This was something else. She sat on the edge of the thin mattress, the springs groaning beneath her slight weight. The silence in the room was heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the factory and the sigh of the wind against the building. One of her roommates, a woman with tired eyes and hair scraped back severely, caught her gaze. The woman offered no smile, just a slight, weary shake of her head before turning away to meticulously unpack a small, battered suitcase. The gesture spoke volumes. Don't ask. Don't hope. Later, needing air, Lyssa wandered back outside. The courtyard was empty now, bathed in the cold, gray light of the late afternoon. She walked towards the edge of the concrete apron near where the cliff path began. The wind whipped strands of hair across her face, tasting of salt and chemicals. Looking down, the sea seemed impossibly far below, a turbulent gray expanse meeting the horizon. She scanned the cliffs, the sparse vegetation, the unyielding rock. No sign of escape. No other buildings. Just the factory, the dorms, the dock, and the oppressive, endless ocean. A flicker of movement near a waste disposal unit behind the mess hall caught her eye. A man, old and stooped, dressed in the same drab gray uniform but dirtier, was methodically sweeping dust and debris into a long-handled pan. He moved slowly, deliberately, almost blending into the background. Was this the janitor? Corv, someone had muttered on the ferry. As she watched, he paused, head cocked as if listening to something beyond the wind and the factory hum. He glanced up, his eyes meeting Lyssa's across the courtyard. They were surprisingly alert eyes in a deeply lined face. He held her gaze for a moment, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod towards a ventilation grill low on the main factory wall, partially obscured by overgrown weeds. A faint, rhythmic clicking sound emanated from it, barely audible. Then he returned to his sweeping, his movements once again slow and unremarkable, melting back into the gray surroundings. Lyssa frowned, a nod towards a vent. What did that mean? Was it a warning, an invitation, or just the meaningless gesture of an old man lost in routine? The clicking sound continued, soft but persistent, like tiny gears turning or insects chitinously stirring in the dark. She shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter. The sun was dipping towards the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and dirty orange. Long shadows stretched across the concrete, making the factory complex appear even more monolithic, more secretive. 6 months. It stretched before her like a prison sentence. Find Leo, find out what happened, and get out. The thought solidified in her mind, a small, hard point of determination against the rising tide of unease. The rhythmic clicking from the vent seemed to pulse in time with her own anxious heartbeat. Chapter 2. The Polymer Flesh. The clanging summons bell was merciless at 5:30. Lyssa swung her legs over the side of the top bunk, joints stiff, head thick from restless sleep. The dormitory air was already dense with the smell of unwashed bodies and stale fear. Below her, the woman with the scraped-back hair was already dressed, methodically lacing up heavy work boots, her face set in the same expression of resigned endurance Lyssa had seen yesterday. No one spoke. The routine seemed ingrained. Rise, wash quickly in the cold, communal bathrooms, dress, file out. Assembly Hall Beta was vast, cold, and echoed with every footstep on the polished concrete floor. Rows of metal chairs faced a raised platform where Foreman Grix stood, arms crossed, impatience radiating from him like heat from asphalt. Several hundred workers filled the seats, their gray uniforms blending into the stark surroundings. The air hummed with the low thrum of machinery bleeding through the walls from the main factory floor. Grix waited until the last person scurried into a seat before speaking, his voice amplified slightly by mounted speakers, adding a metallic edge to his bark. "All right, day shift roster." He read names methodically, assigning sections and line numbers. Chen Lyssa, line 7, component integration. Carries Ben, same. He continued down the list, the names a meaningless drone until he finished. Quotas are posted at each station. Meet them. Exceed them, you might get edible protein tonight. Fail them, his eyes swept the room, pausing fractionally on individuals, and you face disciplinary review. Recycling duty isn't pleasant. Don't test me. He gestured vaguely towards several section supervisors standing near the exits. Your line supervisors will handle specifics. Get to work. No motivation, no encouragement, just the stark demand. The hall emptied quickly, workers shuffling towards designated entrances leading deeper into the complex. Lyssa found line 7, a long conveyor belt snaking through a brightly lit but somehow dreary section of the factory floor. Stations were positioned on either side, each with a stool, an array of specialized tools that looked vaguely dental, and bins of components. The air here carried the strongest chemical odor yet, sharp and sterile, but undercut with that same faint, sickly sweet smell she'd noticed outside, the smell of spoiled plastic mixed with something organic and unplaceable. A young man with anxious eyes and fidgety hands occupied the station opposite hers. He glanced up as she approached, offering a quick, nervous smile. "Lyssa Chen, I'm Ben Carey's. Welcome to the polymer pit." "Thanks," Lyssa managed, setting her small toolkit down. "Polymer pit." "Yeah, well." Ben lowered his voice as a stern-faced supervisor walked past the end of the line. "This stuff." He gestured at the bins beside his station. They were filled with pale, fleshy-looking components in various shapes, smooth ovoids, ridged tubes, things that looked disturbingly like unfinished cartilage. Officially, it's VX9 biosynthetic polymer. Advanced material science, they say. Feels weird, though, right? Lyssa picked up one of the ovoids. It was cool to the touch, yielding slightly under pressure like dense rubber, but with a strangely fibrous texture just beneath the surface. It weighed more than she expected. The color wasn't uniform. Subtle whorls and mottling, almost like real skin, were visible under the harsh fluorescent lights. It did feel weird, deeply unsettling. The conveyor belt jerked to life. Complex chassis, skeletal frameworks of metal and some darker, ceramic-like material, began moving down the line. Their task, as demonstrated silently by the supervisor, was component integration. Using the specialized tools, they had to carefully insert and affix the polymer shapes into specific cavities and onto connection points within the chassis. It required precision. The polymer parts had designated slots, marked with microscopic serial numbers that had to be logged via a scanner at each station. The work was repetitive, demanding intense focus. Click, insert, affix, scan. Click, insert, affix, scan. The polymer resisted the tools slightly, making a faint tearing sound if not handled correctly. Occasionally, a piece would emit a tiny puff of aerosolized vapor when pierced, carrying that sickly sweet scent directly into Lyssa's nostrils, making her gag. Beside her, Ben worked with practiced efficiency, his nervous energy translating into quick, precise movements. He didn't make eye contact often, focusing intently on the parts moving before him. The line supervisor prowled behind them, clipboard in hand, eyes missing nothing. The only sounds were the hum of the belt, the clicking of tools, the occasional scrape of metal, and the amplified thrum of larger machinery elsewhere in the vast building. After what felt like hours, a bell signaled a short break. Ben immediately slumped on his stool, rubbing his temples. "Headache?" Lyssa asked quietly, flexing her cramping fingers. "Always first few hours," Ben muttered, pulling a small water pouch from his pocket. "It's the fumes, I think, or maybe just this place." He took a long sip. "So you're new, just arrived yesterday." "Yeah, on the ferry." "Why'd you sign up?" Ben asked, his eyes flicking nervously towards the supervisor, who was conferring with another worker further down the line. "Nobody comes here unless they're desperate or hiding." Lyssa hesitated. How much could she trust this stranger? But his question mirrored her own observations. Looking for someone, she said, keeping her voice low. My brother, Leo. He took a job like this 6 months ago. Different company name, remote facility. Then he vanished. Ben's fidgeting increased. He glanced around again before leaning slightly closer across the stationary belt. Lyssa Chen, heard the name, came through about 6 months back. Yeah, quiet guy, kept to himself mostly, assigned to materials reclamation, I think. He paused, his expression clouding. Nobody's seen him for a couple of months now, Lyssa. People disappear here. Sometimes they're transferred off island, they say, sometimes. He trailed off, shaking his head. Recycling duty. That's what Grix calls it. Nobody comes back from recycling. A cold dread seeped into Lyssa's bones, heavier than the fatigue from the repetitive work. What is recycling? Nobody knows for sure. Rumors, defective parts, contaminated materials, problem workers, they go to Sector Gamma, sealed section. Ben swallowed hard. Just keep your head down, Lyssa. Make your quotas. Don't draw attention, especially not from the doc. The doc. Dr. Kalen Vaughn, runs the biolabs, Sector Delta, highly restricted. Word is she designed this polymer stuff, and other things. Ben's eyes darted towards a sealed, windowless door at the far end of the assembly hall, marked with a biohazard symbol and the Greek letter delta. She decides who's pulling their weight and who isn't. The bell rang again, ending the break. The conveyor belt lurched back into motion. Click, insert, affix, scan. But now each piece of polymer felt different in Lyssa's hand, more sinister, biosynthetic. Was Leo's disappearance connected to this place, to materials reclamation, to recycling? The questions swirled, making it hard to focus. She fumbled a component, dropping it onto the floor. It made a soft, wet sound. The supervisor was there instantly. Problem Chen. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. No, sorry, slipped. Lyssa retrieved the piece, trying to ignore the faint reddish smear it left on the concrete. Concentrate. Quotas don't meet themselves. The supervisor stared at her for a long moment before moving on. Lyssa could feel Ben's worried gaze from across the line. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of focused labor and gnawing anxiety. At the midday bell, they filed out towards the mess hall. It was another large, functional room, filled with long tables and benches. The food was a grayish paste scooped onto metal trays, alongside dry bread and water. Conversation was sparse, low murmurs about production numbers, malfunctioning equipment, Grix's temper. The atmosphere was thick with suspicion and weariness. No laughter, no camaraderie beyond tense, whispered exchanges. Lyssa found a spot near Ben. Materials reclamation, Lyssa said quietly, picking at the paste. What do they do there? Ben shrugged, chewing mechanically. Process waste, I guess. Salvage usable stuff from rejected batches. Dirty work. Dangerous, some say. Chemical leaks, bad fumes. He didn't sound convinced. Sector Gamma is right next to it. Lyssa thought back to the janitor, Corv. His nod towards the vent, the rhythmic clicking. Was that near Sector Gamma or Delta? The factory layout was a confusing maze in her mind. She needed a map, information, anything. The afternoon shift dragged even more than the morning. Fatigue made her movements sluggish, her focus drift. Once she thought she saw one of the polymer pieces subtly shift shape after she'd affixed it, a slight bulging near the connection point. She blinked, rubbed her eyes. A trick of the light, the fumes, the exhaustion. It had to be. But the image lingered. Near the end of the shift, a commotion erupted further down the line. Shouting. A crash. Lyssa saw Grix striding towards the disturbance, his face thunderous. Two other supervisors converged. They dragged away a struggling worker, a man Lyssa didn't recognize, his face contorted in terror. He was shouting incoherently, something about eyes and moving. Defective batch contamination, the line supervisor announced tersely, her voice tight. Hallucinations are a known side effect of improper handling. Maintain protocols. But her hands were trembling slightly as she adjusted her collar. Ben looked pale. "See," he whispered across the belt when the supervisor moved away. "Don't make waves." Finally, the end-of-shift bell rang. Lyssa felt drained, muscles aching, head pounding. She filed out with the others, the shared misery a palpable thing in the air. Back in the dormitory, the silence felt different now, not just weary but watchful. Lyssa climbed onto her bunk, the thin mattress offering little comfort. She stared at the stained metal underside of the bunk above, thoughts racing. Leo, materials reclamation. Sector Gamma, recycling. Dr. Vaughn, polymer flesh that might be moving. Workers dragged away screaming. Her hand brushed against something small and hard in her pocket. She pulled it out. It was a small, discarded piece of the dark, ceramic-like material from the chassis framework, chipped off during the assembly process. She must have pocketed it without thinking. It was smooth on one side, unnaturally sharp on the broken edge. As she turned it over under the dim light filtering in from the corridor, she saw faint, intricate lines etched into its surface, almost like microscopic circuitry or veins. It felt cold, inert. Yet holding it, the rhythmic clicking sound she'd heard near the vent yesterday echoed faintly in her memory. A blueprint, a component, or just a piece of trash. She closed her fist around it, the sharp edge digging into her palm. It was a piece of the puzzle, she was sure of it. Small, insignificant, but hers. A starting point. Chapter 3. Echoes in the Vents. The second day began identically to the first. The jarring bell, the cold washroom, the silent shuffling towards Assembly Hall Beta. Lyssa felt the fatigue deeper in her bones, a weariness that sleep hadn't dented. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a grim vigilance. Every shadow seemed longer, every metallic clang echoed with potential menace. Every passing supervisor's glance felt like scrutiny. Her awareness was heightened, tuned to the factory's rhythm and its undercurrents of fear. Grix's morning briefing was brutally efficient, devoid of yesterday's minimal explanations. Names, assignments, quota reminders delivered in the same gravelly monotone. Lyssa and Ben were again assigned to Line 7, component integration. The sight of the bins filled with the pale, fleshy polymer made Lyssa's stomach clench. Click, insert, affix, scan. The motions were becoming automatic, muscle memory taking over, which paradoxically made the task more unnerving. It freed her mind to dwell on Leo, on the worker dragged away yesterday, on the dead-eyed resignation of her roommates. Ben seemed even more on edge today. His hands trembled as he handled the polymer pieces, his gaze constantly flicking towards the supervisors, the security cameras, the sealed door leading to Sector Delta. He dropped a component twice in the first hour, earning a sharp reprimand from the line supervisor. "Rough morning," Lyssa asked quietly when the supervisor moved off. Ben wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, leaving a faint gray smudge. "Didn't sleep well, bad dreams." He wouldn't elaborate, his eyes fixed on the moving conveyor belt. "This place, it gets into your head." Lyssa understood. Her own sleep had been plagued by fragmented images. The yielding texture of the polymer under her tools, the vacant stare of a doll's eye, the sound of waves crashing endlessly against unseen cliffs. She focused on the work, trying to match Ben's usual speed despite his current distraction. Precision was paramount. A mistake could mean drawing unwanted attention, could mean recycling duty, could mean ending up like Leo. She found herself studying the polymer components more closely as she worked. The subtle variations in color, the almost imperceptible fibrous structures beneath the surface. Biosynthetic, Dr. Vaughn's creation. What was the biological component? Where did it come from? The question hung heavy and unspoken in the chemically saturated air. She remembered the reddish smear the dropped piece had left on the concrete yesterday. An anomaly, or something intrinsic to the material. The morning break offered a brief respite. Ben devoured a nutrient bar from his pocket, avoiding conversation. Lyssa scanned the cavernous assembly hall, her gaze searching for the familiar stooped figure of the janitor. Corv wasn't visible among the throng of workers clustered near the water dispensers or resting on overturned crates. He seemed to possess an uncanny ability to be present one moment and gone the next. Her eyes drifted towards the low ventilation grill Corv had indicated yesterday, near the mess hall entrance but on the main factory wall. It was partially hidden behind a stack of discarded filter housings. The clicking sound wasn't audible from this distance over the ambient factory noise. She needed to get closer. The midday meal was the same bland paste. Lyssa forced herself to eat, knowing she needed the energy. She sat with Ben again, but he remained withdrawn, lost in his own anxious thoughts. The paranoia in the mess hall was palpable. Workers ate quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact. A dropped tray clattered onto the floor, causing several people to jump violently. No one laughed. The worker responsible flushed crimson, gathered the mess under the watchful eye of a nearby guard, and scurried away. "I need to find the washroom near Sector Gamma," Lyssa said, keeping her voice low, pushing her tray away. Ben looked up sharply, his eyes wide. "Why? Gamma's restricted. Materials reclamation access only, and security patrols." "Leo worked in materials reclamation," Lyssa interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. "Maybe someone there remembers something specific, a transfer slip, anything." It was a flimsy excuse, but the only one she could offer. Ben chewed his lip. "It's risky, Lyssa. Grix catches you outside your designated zones." "I know, but I have to try." She stood up. "Cover for me if anyone asks. Say I felt sick." Ben hesitated, then gave a jerky nod. 10 minutes, max. Then I say you went to the infirmary. Don't push it." Lyssa offered a grateful nod and slipped away from the table, merging with the sparse traffic moving back towards the assembly halls. Instead of heading straight for Line 7, she kept to the periphery, trying to appear purposeful but lost. The factory corridors branched off in multiple directions, identified by faded stenciled letters and numbers overhead. Most were brightly lit, sterile, echoing with the sounds of distant work. Others were dimmer, service corridors lined with pipes and conduits, the air thick with dust and the smell of oil. She navigated by instinct and muffled sounds, trying to move towards the area she guessed housed materials reclamation, based on the flow of workers in dirtier uniforms. She passed heavy double doors marked Sector Beta Processing and Sector Epsilon Finishing. The omnipresent hum of machinery vibrated through the soles of her boots. Security cameras were mounted at every intersection, their dark lenses panning slowly. She kept her head down, walking briskly, hopping she looked like she belonged. Finally, she saw a sign. Sector Gamma/Materials Reclamation Authorized Personnel Only. The corridor leading towards it was noticeably grimmer. The lights flickered overhead, casting unreliable shadows. The air smelled foul, a mixture of chemical solvents and decay. A heavy steel door, scarred and dented, blocked the entrance to Gamma itself. Beside it, a smaller access door likely led to reclamation. Two guards stood posted outside the Gamma door, armed with shock batons, their faces impassive. Lyssa quickly ducked into a cross corridor before they could spot her. Retreating slightly, she found herself near the section of the outer factory wall where she estimated the vent Corv had indicated should be. And there it was, almost hidden behind rusted metal shelving units laden with defunct machine parts. Crouching down, pretending to tie her bootlace, she strained her ears. Over the general factory hum, she could hear it, the faint, rhythmic clicking. Tick, tick, tick. Not mechanical, not like gears, more organic. Like fingernails tapping on thin plastic, or the skittering of tiny claws. She glanced around. The immediate corridor was empty. The guards at the Gamma entrance were out of sight around the corner. Taking a chance, she reached towards the grill. It was cool metal, vibrating slightly. The clicking seemed louder now, emanating from the darkness within the vent shaft. Mixed with it was another sound, a low, intermittent whisper, like dry leaves rustling or snakeskin sliding over rough stone. Suddenly, a piercing electronic squeal echoed down the corridor, followed by Grick's amplified voice booming from unseen speakers. Intruder alert. Unidentified personnel detected. Sector Gamma approach corridor. Security teams converge. Panic seized Lyssa. She scrambled upright, heart hammering against her ribs. Footsteps pounded nearby. She had seconds. Darting back the way she came, she plunged into the first intersecting corridor she reached, praying it led away from the converging security. It was darker here, lined with massive pipes weeping condensation. She ran, footsteps echoing loudly in the confined space. Behind her she heard shouts, the thud of boots. They were searching. She risked a glance back, saw beams from flashlights sweeping across the junction she'd just left. She needed to hide. An alcove, a maintenance hatch, anything. Further down, a narrow door stood slightly ajar, marked only with a faded electrical hazard symbol. Desperate, Lyssa slipped inside, pulling the door almost closed behind her, leaving only a hairline crack to peer through. She found herself in a cramped electrical junction closet, filled with humming transformers and thick bundles of cables snaking across the floor and walls. The air tasted metallic. She held her breath, listening. The sounds of the search party grew louder, closer. Boots clattered past the closet door. Check those service tunnels, Grix's voice closer than she liked. Vaughn wants no interruptions today. Find them. The footsteps receded down the main corridor. Lyssa sagged against the humming transformers, dizzy with relief and adrenaline. That was too close. She couldn't afford risks like that again. But the clicking, the whispering, what was inside that vent? Waiting until the sounds faded completely, she cautiously pushed the closet door open. The corridor was empty again. She needed to get back to the mess hall or her workstation before her absence became official, before Ben reported her to the infirmary. Taking a different route, navigating by the overhead signs, she hurried back towards the more populated sections of the factory. As she rounded a corner near Assembly Hall Beta, she stopped abruptly. Standing by the entrance, conferring quietly with two gray-uniformed security personnel, was a woman unlike anyone Lyssa had seen on the island. Tall, slender, with severe dark hair pulled back tightly, she wore a pristine white lab coat over tailored trousers. Her face was sharp, intelligent, her expression conveying an air of absolute cold authority. She held a slim data tablet, gesturing decisively as she spoke. Even from this distance, Lyssa felt the intensity of her focus, the chilling lack of warmth. It had to be her, Dr. Kaylin Vaughn. Vaughn finished speaking to the guards, who nodded stiffly and moved off. Then, her gaze swept across the corridor, briefly passing over Lyssa without pausing, as if she were merely part of the drab background before she turned and entered the assembly hall, presumably heading towards the sealed door of Sector Delta. The brief visual contact sent a chill down Lyssa's spine far colder than the damp air of the factory. There was an unnerving stillness about the doctor, a predatory focus that promised sharp intellect and zero compassion. Ben's warning echoed in her mind, "Don't draw attention, especially not from the doc." Lyssa slipped back into the flow of workers heading towards the afternoon shift, her mind racing. The clicking vent near Sector Gamma, Grix's aggressive search, the brief, chilling glimpse of Dr. Vaughn, and always the polymer flesh moving down the line waiting for her hands. Click, insert, affix, scan. The pieces felt heavier now, imbued with a deeper dread. She clutched the sharp ceramic fragment hidden in her pocket. It felt solid, real, a tiny anchor in the swirling uncertainty and fear threatening to pull her under. The factory held its secrets tightly, but Lyssa was certain now. The secrets were monstrous, and Leo was tangled somewhere in their heart. Finding him meant pulling at threads that could unravel everything, including herself. Chapter 4: Whispers in the Polymer. Lyssa slid back into place opposite Ben Carey's just as the afternoon shift officially recommenced. The conveyor belt shuddered, then began its slow, relentless crawl forward, carrying the skeletal chassis towards them. Ben shot her a look, a mixture of relief and terror. "Infirmary," he mouthed silently, eyes wide, jerking his head slightly towards the nearest supervisor who was currently occupied berating a worker for a slow scan time. Lyssa shook her head almost imperceptibly, picking up her first tool. "Got lost," she whispered back, focusing on the chassis approaching her station. Her hands felt unsteady, the near miss with Grix's security team leaving a residue of adrenaline that made fine motor control difficult. The memory of Dr. Vaughn's cold, assessing gaze was imprinted on her mind. Ben's anxiety spiked visibly. He fumbled the first polymer component, his knuckles white where he gripped his insertion tool. Lost. Lyssa, they called an intruder alert. Gamma sector. Keep your voice down, Lyssa hissed, not looking at him. I wasn't near Gamma. Took a wrong turn down a service corridor. Got back before anyone saw me. A lie mostly, but necessary. She couldn't afford Ben panicking. It would draw attention to them both. Click, insert, affix, scan. The rhythm was harder to maintain now. Lyssa forced herself to concentrate, pushing away the image of the flickering lights in the restricted corridor, the sound of pounding boots, the unnerving clicking from the vent. She focused on the polymer piece in her hand, a smooth, curved segment meant to slot into what looked like a rudimentary shoulder joint on the chassis. Under the focused beam of her workstation lamp, the material seemed almost translucent in spots. Were those filaments? Tiny, dark threads suspended within the pale matrix. She tilted it, trying to catch the light differently. The threads seemed to form intricate, branching patterns disturbingly like capillaries or nerve bundles. Before she could be certain, the specific angle was lost, and the material just looked like flawed plastic again. Had she imagined it, or had she seen a glimpse of the bio in biosynthetic? The chassis moved on. The next one arrived. Lyssa picked up another polymer piece, this one shaped like a section of spinal column. It felt slightly warmer than the ambient air, a faint, residual heat that dissipated quickly against her fingertips. She pressed it gently. Did it yield more than yesterday? Did it pulse just faintly with something other than the factory's vibrations? She held her breath, concentrating, trying to isolate the sensation. Nothing. Just cold, inert polymer. Exhaustion and fear playing tricks, she told herself, but the doubt lingered. A sudden clatter broke the monotony. Further down the line, a worker let out a sharp cry, dropping a chassis component. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Supervisors converged immediately. Lyssa watched, heart pounding, as the worker frantically pointed at the chassis now halted on the belt before him. It moved. I swear the arm section, it twitched. The worker stammered, his face pale. The lead supervisor examined the chassis, then the component the man had been trying to affix. Her expression was unreadable. Stress fatigue, she declared loudly, her voice carrying down the line. You're seeing things. Report to the infirmary for a sedative. Someone clear this station. Two security guards appeared seemingly from nowhere and escorted the trembling worker away, not towards the infirmary entrance, but back towards the dormitory block. Another worker quickly took his place, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Ben was practically vibrating with repressed fear. "See," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the belt. "Happens all the time, fumes, stress, or something else." Lyssa said nothing, her eyes fixed on the polymer piece in her hand, a twitching arm section. Hallucinations, the supervisor claimed. But Lyssa remembered the worker dragged away yesterday, shouting about eyes. She remembered the potential capillary patterns, the fleeting warmth. What if it wasn't just stress? What if these components, these vessels, held a latent potential for movement, for animation, even before full assembly? The concept sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. Genetic blueprints. Vessels waiting for, what, consciousness activation? She needed more information. Seeing Corv again felt imperative. His cryptic nod, his knowledge of the factory's hidden corners. He was the only person who seemed to exist outside the rigid structure of workers and supervisors, the only one who might offer a clue without alerting Grixt or Vaughn. During the short afternoon break, Lyssa scanned the designated rest area near the water dispensers. No sign of the old janitor. She finished her water quickly, ignoring Ben's questioning look, and slipped away, heading towards the waste disposal area behind the mess hall where she'd seen Corv yesterday. Luck was with her. Corv was there, slowly emptying overflowing bins into a large, wheeled receptacle. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his stooped shoulders suggesting frailty, but his movements economical and sure. Lyssa approached cautiously. "Excuse me." Corv didn't startle. He finished tipping a bin of food waste, then turned slowly, his lined face impassive, though his eyes were sharp, appraising. "Zone restriction breach earlier," he stated flatly, his voice a low rasp. "Heard the alert, heard the boots." Lyssa's breath hitched, he knew. I got turned around." Corv leaned on his broom, studying her. "Lots of corners in this place. Easy to get turned around. Easier to end up where you shouldn't be. Near Gamma, maybe. Near the vents." He let the question hang in the air. "There was a sound," Lyssa said, deciding a partial truth was better than a total denial. "Clicking. From a vent near the Gamma corridor." Corv nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "Factory has noises, pipes rattle, vermin skitter." He paused. "Sometimes things get into the ducts, things that don't belong. Waste finds its way everywhere." "Waste," Lyssa prompted gently, "like defective parts." "Parts, samples, mistakes." Corv's eyes flickered towards the towering incinerator stack rising from behind Sector Gamma, trailing a thin plume of dark smoke into the gray sky. "Everything has to go somewhere, especially Dr. Vaughn's projects. She demands perfection, abhors flawed copies." Flawed copies. The phrase snagged in Lyssa's mind. Vessels, blueprints, stolen DNA. "My brother worked here," Lyssa said, lowering her voice. "Lyssa Chen, materials reclamation, he disappeared." Corv's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps pity. "Reclamation handles the dock's rejects," he rasped. "Unstable compounds, biological contaminants, messy work." He sighed, a sound like dust settling. "Sometimes the waste isn't just material. Sometimes it's people who ask too many questions, people who see too much." He straightened up, hefting his broom. "Careful what you stir up, girl. Some dust is better left settled." He began sweeping again, broad strokes moving across the concrete, his attention seemingly elsewhere. Lyssa knew she was dismissed. He'd given her scraps, warnings wrapped in mundane observations. Waste finds its way everywhere. Flawed copies. Careful what you stir up. He knew more, she was certain, but wouldn't say it outright. Perhaps couldn't. She retreated, leaving the old man to his solitary work, the smell of decay and chemicals clinging to the air. The final hours of the shift were torture. Every polymer piece felt contaminated, dangerous. Every flicker of the overhead light seemed like a prelude to something monstrous. The sheer scale of the operation, the hundreds of workers mindlessly assembling these potentially horrific components, pressed down on her. What was the end goal? Who were these vessels for? The thought of Leo's DNA possibly being incorporated into one of these things made her feel physically ill. Back in the dormitory, the oppressive atmosphere was thicker than ever. Workers collapsed onto their bunks, too exhausted or too cowed to speak. The woman below Lyssa stared blankly at the ceiling, unmoving. Lyssa climbed onto her bunk, pulling out the sharp ceramic fragment she'd kept hidden. She turned it over in her fingers. The etched lines she'd noticed before seemed clearer now, less random. They intersected, branched, formed patterns that were complex and deliberate. Not circuitry, she realized. More like diagrams, biological diagrams, miniaturized anatomical charts or molecular structures, blueprints. The concept crashed into her mind with chilling clarity. The polymer wasn't just mimicking flesh. It was flesh, synthesized, grown based on specific genetic instructions. The chassis wasn't just a frame. It was an articulated armature designed to support and integrate this synthetic biology. Dr. Vaughn wasn't just a materials scientist. She was a geneticist playing God, using stolen human DNA, Leo's DNA, as the source code. And the dolls, the finished products shipped off this island, weren't toys. They were bespoke biological constructs, vessels, waiting. Waiting for what? Corv's words echoed, flawed copies. Vaughn demanded perfection. Were these vessels meant to house something? To contain a consciousness transferred from somewhere else? An alien consciousness, as the impossible thought whispered at the edge of her fear. It sounded insane, ripped from the pages of pulp fiction, but here, in this factory built on secrets and smelling of chemicals and decay, surrounded by twitching polymer and disappearing workers, it felt terrifyingly plausible. She had to know more. She had to find proof. Getting into materials reclamation or Sector Gamma seemed impossible with the guards and surveillance, but Corv's words about waste getting into the ducts, the clicking sound, the vents, they connected the factory, carried its air, its sounds, perhaps its secrets. Lyssa looked around the bleak dormitory room. High on the wall near the ceiling above the triple-tiered bunks was a ventilation grill, larger than the one near Gamma but similar in design. 4 simple screws held its metal cover in place. It was likely connected to the main system. If she could get inside, maybe she could navigate, listen, observe. It was incredibly risky. Discovery meant recycling, certain doom. But staying here, assembling components day after day while Leo remained missing, while these horrors were being built, that felt like a slower kind of death. Her fingers tightened around the ceramic shard. Its sharp edge was a small point of pain, a focus in the overwhelming fear. She needed tools. She needed a map, even a rudimentary one. She needed to get into those vents, tonight. The decision settled, cold and hard in her gut. The risk was immense, but the potential reward, finding Leo, exposing this place, outweighed the fear. For now. Chapter 5. Ducks of Dust and Dread. The dormitory settled into the strained silence that passed for night in Plant 7. It wasn't true quiet. The building breathed with the low hum of distant machinery, the sigh of wind against the ill-fitting window frames, and the restless movements of sleeping bodies crammed into metal bunks. Lyssa lay rigid on her thin mattress, staring up at the stained metal beneath the bunk above, listening. She tracked the slow passage of time by the changing cadence of snores, coughs and murmurs from the women sharing the room. Waiting. Every creak of a bedspring, every footstep in the distant corridor, tightened the knot of anxiety in her stomach. Curfew was 2200, lights out at 2300. She waited until the faint glow from the corridor lights indicated it was well past midnight, hoping any potential patrols had completed their rounds. The woman directly below her, the one with the severely scraped-back hair, seemed deeply asleep, her breathing slow and regular. The others were similarly still. Now or never. Silently, Lyssa slid off the top bunk, her bare feet making no sound on the cold concrete floor. She moved with excruciating slowness, pausing after every small motion, straining her ears. The dormitory room was dark, illuminated only by weak light filtering under the door and through the grimy window overlooking the courtyard. She retrieved the sharp ceramic fragment from its hiding place inside her worn boot. Its edge felt dangerously keen against her palm. Her target was the ventilation grill high on the wall near the ceiling corner. It was easily 6 feet above the top bunk level. Reaching it required careful maneuvering. She dragged one of the room's few battered wooden stools, used mostly for reaching upper storage shelves seldom utilized, towards the wall beneath the vent, the scraping sound unnervingly loud in the stillness. She froze, listening. No reaction from the sleepers. Climbing onto the stool, she could just reach the bottom edge of the grill. It was standard industrial metal mesh, secured at the 4 corners with simple, flathead screws. They looked old, the slots slightly burred. Lyssa braced herself, holding the ceramic shard like a makeshift screwdriver. She pressed the sharpest point into the slot of the bottom left screw. It took several attempts to get a purchase. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the room's coolness. Applying steady, careful pressure, she began to turn. The screw resisted, grating slightly, then slowly started to yield with a faint squeal of rusted metal. Lyssa stopped immediately, listening. Silence. She continued, turning the screw fraction by fraction, the tiny sounds amplified in her own ears until they seemed deafening. 1 screw out. She pocketed it carefully. 3 more to go. The top screws were harder to reach, forcing her to stretch precariously from the wobbly stool. Her muscles burned with the strain of maintaining awkward positions while applying precise force. Each successful turn of a screw felt like a small victory against the suffocating presence of the factory. The 4th screw finally came loose. Heart hammering, Lyssa carefully worked the grill cover free from its housing. It was heavier than it looked, coated in thick dust and a slightly greasy film. She nearly dropped it, stifling a gasp as she regained her grip. Where to put it? Leaving it on the floor was too obvious. She settled for placing it carefully on the very top surface of the tall, shared locker unit near the bunks, hoping it would blend into the shadows. Now the opening. A square of absolute darkness gaped in the wall. The air wafting out carried the familiar chemical tang, but also a thick, musty smell of old dust, dampness, and something else. A faint, coppery undertone like old blood. She pulled the stool closer, climbed back up, and peered inside. Utter blackness. The distant factory hum was clearer here, channeled through the ductwork. And beneath it, faint but undeniable, was the sound. Tick, tick, tick. Not as close as it had been near Gamma, but present. It seemed to come from deeper within the system, a siren call into the unknown. Hesitation clawed at her. This was madness. Crawling into confined, dark spaces in a facility filled with unknown horrors, guided only by a sound she didn't understand. What if she got stuck? What if she ran into something? What if she couldn't find her way back? But the image of Leo's face, the feel of the yielding polymer, the memory of Dr. Vaughn's cold eyes, they pushed her forward. This was the only path available. Taking a deep breath, Lyssa hoisted herself up, gripping the dusty lower edge of the opening. She swung her legs inside, scraping her knee on the rough metal edge. The duct was square, perhaps 2 feet by 2 feet, barely large enough to crawl through. The metal floor was cold, gritty with accumulated debris. Dust immediately filled her nostrils, making her want to sneeze. She suppressed the urge fiercely, pinching her nose. Once fully inside, she reached back, trying to pull the grill cover closed behind her. It was awkward, heavy. She managed to get it mostly back in place, leaving just a small gap at the bottom, hoping it wouldn't be noticeable from the floor. Total darkness enveloped her. Disorientation hit immediately. The air was thick, stagnant. The factory hum vibrated through the metal walls of the duct, a constant, oppressive presence. She waited a moment, letting her eyes adjust, but there was no light to adjust to. This was darkness absolute. She relied on touch. The floor was metal, riveted. The walls were smooth, cold. She began to crawl forward, moving slowly, cautiously, hands outstretched. Her goal was uncertain: find the source of the clicking. Try to navigate towards sector gamma or delta based on sound. Eavesdrop. Anything. The duct seemed to go straight for a while, then turned sharply right. The clicking sound seemed slightly louder after the turn. She followed it, her knees protesting against the hard metal, her hands becoming coated in greasy dust. Every few yards she encountered smaller ducts branching off, some round, some square. Potential pathways or dead ends. Without a map, it was pure guesswork. She stayed in what felt like the main channel, following the direction of the clicking. The air changed subtly, the chemical smell growing stronger, overriding the dust. She crawled over something soft and yielding, recoiling instinctively. Reaching back cautiously, her fingers brushed against cloth. A scrap of the gray uniform fabric, stiff and slightly sticky. Discarded, or evidence of someone else who had ventured into these tunnels. The thought was deeply unsettling. Further on, she encountered junction points where multiple large ducts converged. The factory hum was louder here, seeming to come from below. She paused, listening intently. Through the metal floor, she could hear the rhythmic clatter of machinery, muffled voices shouting instructions. Probably one of communications hubs or major processing lines directly beneath her. She pressed her ear to the cold metal, trying to decipher words, but it was just noise. Choosing the duct where the clicking seemed most prominent, she continued. The sound was definitely closer now. Tick, 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 tick. It had a peculiar rhythm, fast and intermittent, almost insectal. Mixed with it was a faint, wet, slithering sound. She imagined mutated rats, oversized centipedes, glitchlings hiding in the darkness. Her skin crawled. The duct began to slope downward slightly. Loose debris, nuts, bolts, unidentified gritty material skittered ahead of her as she moved. Then her outstretched hand brushed against something different. Not cold metal, something. Papery and dry, she felt it cautiously. It was thin, brittle, and crumbled at her touch. It felt like shed skin. Not reptile skin, but something else. Smooth on one side, faintly textured on the other. polymer, had a finished component shed its outer layer? Or was it something organic? She crawled forward, encountering more of the dry, papery fragments. Then the clicking stopped abruptly. Silence, apart from the ubiquitous factory hum and her own ragged breathing. Lyssa froze, every nerve screaming. Why had it stopped? Had it heard her? Was it waiting? She remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, straining her ears. Nothing. Just the thrumming machinery below, the sigh of air moving sluggishly through the vents. Slowly, cautiously, she began to move forward again. The duct turned sharply upwards. Ahead, a faint gray light filtered in. A grill. Lyssa crawled towards it, relief washing over her at the prospect of seeing anything other than pitch blackness. She reached the grill and carefully peered through the slats. She was looking down from ceiling height into a brightly lit room. It wasn't part of the factory floor. This was different. Sterile white walls, gleaming stainless steel tables, complex machinery humming quietly. Glass beakers bubbled with strangely colored liquids. Computer monitors displayed intricate, shifting diagrams, complex chains of molecules, genetic sequences. And in the center of the room, on a tilted examination table bathed in the harsh glare of surgical lamps, lay a doll. No, not just a doll. It was one of the chassis structures from the assembly line, but it was nearly complete. The pale polymer flesh had been meticulously integrated, smoothed, tinted to an unnervingly lifelike skin tone. Delicate electronic components and hair-fine wiring were visible through transparent panels not yet sealed. It looked disturbingly human, like an anatomical model sculpted by a psychopath. Standing beside the table, back towards Lyssa's viewpoint, was a figure in a pristine white lab coat. Tall, slender, dark hair pulled back severely. Dr. Kaylin Vaughn. She held a delicate instrument, making minute adjustments to something within the vessel's open cranial cavity. Her movements were precise, economical, utterly absorbed in her work. Lyssa watched, transfixed, barely daring to breathe. This was Sector Delta, Vaughn's lab, the heart of the operation. She was seeing the creation process up close, the genetic blueprint being given its final form. Then Vaughn paused. She straightened up slightly, head tilted as if listening. Had Lyssa made a sound? Had her breathing hitched? Vaughn slowly turned her head, not all the way around, but enough to reveal her profile. Her expression was one of intense concentration, tinged with something else. Annoyance, expectation. And then from the vessel on the table came the sound. Not loud, but clear in the relative quiet of the lab, echoing slightly in the vent shaft. Tick, 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 tick. It wasn't coming from Vaughn's instruments. It was coming from inside the vessel's head. Dr. Vaughn offered a small, chilling smile, not looking at the grill but towards the vessel. "Impatience," she murmured, her voice cool and low, yet carrying clearly up to the vent. "Almost time, almost perfect." The clicking continued, rhythmic, insistent, somehow expectant. Lyssa felt ice spread through her veins. The sound wasn't vermin, it wasn't loose machinery. It was the vessels themselves, waiting, aware. Suddenly, another sound intruded much closer. A heavy scraping sound from directly behind her in the pitch-black duct. Lyssa whirled around, heart seizing in her chest, eyes useless in the darkness. Something large was moving in the vent system. And it was close, very close. Chapter 6, Glitchling. Panic slammed into Lyssa like a physical blow. Adrenaline surged, overriding thought. She scrambled backwards, away from the unseen scraping sound behind her, pressing herself against the cold metal grill overlooking Vaughn's lab. Her breath came in ragged gasps, loud in the confined space. Below, Dr. Vaughn's head snapped up, her gaze instantly locking onto the grill high on her laboratory wall. There was no surprise in her eyes, only cold, calculating assessment. She hadn't been talking to the vessel. She'd been talking to whoever was in the vents. She knew. Behind Lyssa, the scraping intensified, accompanied by a low, wet gurgling sound that spoke of damaged tissues and corrupted biology. Something heavy dragged itself forward, the sound echoing horribly in the metal confines. Lyssa couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't flee except back towards Vaughn's clinical domain. Trapped. Subject GR07. Vaughn's voice sliced through the air, calm and commanding, directed not at Lyssa but at the thing in the duct behind her. Containment breach. Sedation protocol inactive. She tapped something on a control panel near the examination table. The thing behind Lyssa let out a choked, bubbling screech, a sound of mingled pain and incoherent rage. It lurched forward again, faster now. Lyssa felt a puff of foul air wash over her, thick with the stench of decay and chemical waste. Something bumped hard against her legs. She kicked out blindly, connecting with something that felt yielding but tough, like packed, damp earth covered in rough sacking. The screech intensified, closer, followed by a wet, snapping sound. Lyssa scrabbled frantically at the grill, trying to find purchase, trying to pull herself away from the unseen horror sharing the narrow space. Below, Vaughn watched with detached interest, making no move to intervene, her expression akin to a researcher observing interacting specimens. A shape resolved itself dimly in the absolute darkness behind Lyssa, not through sight but through a primal sense of presence, of wrongness. It was large, misshapen, filling the duct. She felt, rather than saw, multiple limbs scrabbling for purchase, heard the slick drag of something heavy and boneless. The stench intensified, rot, formaldehyde, and the unique sickly sweetness of the VX9 polymer gone bad. It lunged. Lyssa cried out, twisting desperately. Something rough and cold, like multiple fused fingers ending in shards of plastic or bone, snagged her ankle. Pain shot up her leg. She kicked again, wildly, connecting hard. The grip loosened momentarily. She used the chance, fueled by terror, to shove herself forward, down the slight incline of the duct, away from the lab grill and deeper into the unexplored blackness. The thing GR07 Vaughn had called it, a glitchling one of the doc's rejects Corv had mentioned, pursued her, its movements jerky and unpredictable, punctuated by those awful wet, gurgling sounds. It scraped and bumped against the duct walls, seemingly hindered by its own malformed body. Lyssa crawled frantically, blindly, tears of panic streaming down her face, mixing with the dust and grime. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The duct branched, left or right. She chose left at random, scrambling into the narrower side passage. The glitchling paused at the junction, letting out a confused, low moan. Could it not follow? Was it too large for the smaller duct? Lyssa didn't wait to find out. She pushed onward, the metal scraping her knees and elbows raw. The air in this side duct felt different, less dusty with a stronger metallic tang. It also seemed colder. She crawled for what felt like a long time, the sounds of the glitchling fatting behind her, replaced once more by the ubiquitous factory hum and the frantic pounding of her own heart. She eventually bumped into a solid wall, a dead end. No, panic surged again. Trapped. She felt around frantically. The duct ended, but there seemed to be a vertical shaft extending upwards and downwards, possibly a maintenance access or part of a different system. She listened. No sounds from above. From below, only the faint, distant thrum of machinery. Up seemed the only option besides backtracking towards the Glitchling or Vaughn. There were rudimentary handholds, simple metal rungs bolted into the side of the shaft, covered in the same greasy film as everything else, but solid. Lyssa started to climb, pulling herself up into the vertical darkness, her muscles screaming in protest. She ascended rung by painful rung, the shaft blessedly free of clicking sounds or papery skin fragments. Where was she going? Above the labs, towards the roof. After climbing maybe 20 feet, she reached another horizontal duct opening. She paused, listening. Silence. Cautiously, she pulled herself into it. This duct felt wider, cleaner somehow. Less dust, less grime. The air tasted fresher, cooler. She crawled forward slowly, senses on high alert. Ahead, another patch of faint light. Another grill. Relief warred with apprehension. Where did this one lead? She approached stealthily, peering through the slats. She was looking down into a different kind of space. Not a lab, not the factory floor. It was a storage area, but clinical, organized. Rows upon rows of floor-to-ceiling shelving units made of gleaming metal. And on the shelves, dolls. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of them. They weren't like the components on the assembly line or the vessel in Vaughn's lab. These were finished products, dressed in simple, identical shifts of gray cloth. Their synthetic skin had the smooth, flawless texture of porcelain, yet held an unnerving, lifelike quality. Their eyes, made of glass or crystal, stared forward blankly, reflecting the overhead lights. They sat in perfect rows, identical faces gazing into the distance, waiting. The sheer number of them was staggering, chilling. An army of empty vessels. Lyssa scanned the room. It seemed empty of personnel. Security cameras were visible, mounted high on the walls, their lenses sweeping methodically. In the center of the room stood a single, ornate pedestal. Upon it sat a doll different from the others. Larger, dressed in finer clothes, its features more defined, almost regal. Its eyes seemed darker, deeper, possessing a disturbing focus lacking in the others. Was this the hive mind node Ben had mentioned in hushed tones? The central coordinator. Lyssa felt a wave of profound unease wash over her. The silence, the order, the sheer multitude of waiting forms, it was deeply disturbing. This was the nursery, she realized. The holding place for the completed vessels before shipment, before activation. Suddenly, one of the dolls on a nearby shelf, directly in Lyssa's line of sight, moved. It wasn't a twitch, not a hallucination. Its head turned slowly, deliberately, until its blank glass eyes seemed to stare directly up at the grill where Lyssa hid. Lyssa froze, ice flooding her veins. It couldn't be possible. They were supposed to be inert, waiting. Had her presence triggered something? Was the hive mind node aware? The doll continued to stare, its painted lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. Then, slowly, its head turned back to face forward, resuming its previous position. Had it happened? Had she imagined the whole thing in her terrified state? She couldn't be sure, but the certainty that she was being watched, not just by cameras, but by the dolls themselves, settled deep in her gut. She needed to get out. Back to the dorms, back to anonymity. Staying here spying was courting disaster. She began to backtrack through the wider duct, moving as quickly and silently as possible. Reaching the vertical shaft, she climbed down, clumsy with haste, scraping her hands on the rough rungs. She found the junction, listening intently. No sound of the glitchling. Taking a deep breath, she re-entered the main duct system she'd been in before encountering the monster. Navigating back was terrifyingly difficult. Every turn looked the same in the darkness. She relied on memory, on the subtle changes in airflow and sound, praying she was heading the right way. Twice she reached dead ends and had to backtrack, panic gnawing at her. The fear of encountering the glitchling again, or worse, of Vaughn somehow sealing the vents, spurred her onward. Finally, after what felt like hours lost in the suffocating blackness, she felt a familiar texture under her hands, the slightly greasy dust near the dormitory branch. She crawled faster, hope surging. She reached the opening, pushed aside the grill cover she'd precariously balanced, and tumbled awkwardly onto the wooden stool below, nearly collapsing onto the floor. The dormitory room was still dark, still silent except for the soft breathing of the sleepers. Lyssa quickly retrieved the screws from her pocket. Her hands trembled violently as she fumbled with the ceramic shard, trying to reinsert and tighten the screws. It felt impossible, the simple task magnified by exhaustion and terror. One screw slipped, clattering onto the concrete. Lyssa froze, listening. A sleeper stirred, mumbled, then settled back into silence. Heart pounding, Lyssa retrieved the screw and finally managed to secure the grill, tightening the screws as best she could with her makeshift tool. She pushed the stool back to its original position, wiped frantically at the dust and grime covering her clothes and skin, though she knew it was a futile gesture in the dark. She scrambled back onto her top bunk, pulling the thin blanket over herself, shivering uncontrollably despite the stuffy air. She lay there, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, replaying the horrors of the vents. Vaughn's cold awareness, the glitchling's pursuit, the clicking inside the vessel's head, the impossibly turning doll in the nursery. This place was worse than she could have imagined. The conspiracy wasn't just corporate malfeasance, it was monstrous, potentially inhuman. And she was trapped in the middle of it, armed with nothing but a ceramic shard and terrifying fragments of knowledge. Sleep was impossible now. The factory hum seemed louder, the darkness deeper, filled with the imagined clicks and whispers of the things being made here, and the certain knowledge that Dr. Vaughn knew someone had been in her vents, knew, and was likely waiting. Chapter 7. The Watchful Eyes. Dawn arrived not with light, but with the renewed clang of the summons bell drilling into Lyssa's skull. She hadn't slept. Every creak of the dormitory building, every gust of wind, every distant factory noise had been magnified into a potential threat. Rolling off the bunk felt like lifting lead weights. Her muscles screamed from the desperate crawl and climb through the vents. Her joints ached, and scratches she hadn't noticed before stung on her knees and elbows. The greasy dust seemed ingrained in her pores, the phantom stench of rot and chemicals clinging to her senses. Washing in the cold communal basin, she avoided looking too closely at her reflection. The hollows under her eyes were dark bruises, her face pale and strained. She scrubbed at her skin, trying to erase the physical evidence of her nocturnal excursion, knowing the deeper contamination, the fear, the knowledge, couldn't be washed away. The other women in the washroom moved like automatons, their faces blank masks of endurance. Did any of them know? Did they suspect? Or were they simply too beaten down to notice or care about one more haunted face among them? Walking towards Assembly Hall Beta felt different this morning. Lyssa found herself scanning every intersection, every shadowy corner, every security camera lens. Was Vaughn watching her specifically? Had the glitchling left some trace on her, a scent, a residue that marked her? Or was Vaughn merely waiting for the intruder to make another mistake? The air hummed with the usual machinery drone, but beneath it, Lyssa imagined a tighter thrum of surveillance, of patient, predatory awareness. Grix's briefing was curt, almost contemptuous. He paced before the assembled workers, his heavy boots echoing. Production quotas increased by 5% effective immediately, he barked. A collective sigh, almost imperceptible, rippled through the room. Dr. Von requires expedited output. Failure is not an option. Supervisors will monitor throughput constantly. Any deviation, his eyes, small and hard in his fleshy face, swept across them, will be addressed permanently. He didn't mention the intruder alert. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Work harder, keep your heads down, don't cause trouble. Back on line 7, the bin of polymer components seemed actively malevolent. Lyssa picked up the first piece, an articulated joint section, her hand trembling slightly. She forced steadiness into her grip, acutely aware of Ben Carey's watching her from across the conveyor belt. His face was etched with worry. "You okay?" he whispered when the line supervisor was momentarily distracted at the far end. "You look like death warmed over." "Fine, just tired," Lyssa lied, focusing on the component. Click, insert, affix, scan. The familiar rhythm felt like a countdown. She examined the piece closely before inserting it. Were those lines she'd seen yesterday, the capillary-like threads, more distinct today? Was that faint discoloration near the edge a bruise, a flaw, a sign of something internal? She slotted it into the chassis, trying to ignore the way it seemed to nestle into place with an almost organic compliance. The increased quota pressed down on them all. The pace was relentless. Supervisors stalked the lines, their scrutiny sharper, less tolerant of fumbled components or slow scan times. Twice, Lyssa saw workers pulled off the line for minor infractions, their faces pale with terror as Grix himself materialized to oversee their removal. They weren't shouted at, just quietly, efficiently escorted away towards the grim, unmarked doors leading to unknown sectors, towards recycling. Lyssa felt Vaughn's unseen eyes on her constantly. Was it paranoia? Or was the doctor subtly observing the workforce through the omnipresent cameras, searching for the one worker who showed signs of unusual stress, fear, or knowledge? Lyssa forced herself to maintain a mask of numb concentration, mimicking the motions, keeping her gaze fixed on her workstation. But inside, her thoughts raced. The glitchling, the clicking vessel, the doll turning its head in the nursery. Leo. At the morning break, Ben pulled her aside near the grimy water dispensers, his voice urgent, low. "Lyssa, what did you do last night?" After the alert, security was everywhere. They were asking questions in the dorm blocks, checking rosters. "I told you I got lost," Lyssa insisted, keeping her face averted, focusing on filling her water pouch. "Don't lie to me," Ben hissed, grabbing her arm. His hand was shaking. "People are scared. Grixt is on edge. Vaughn was seen leaving Sector Delta late last night, looked like thunder. Whatever you did, they know someone broke rules. They'll start looking closer. At everyone. You gotta stop whatever you're doing." Lyssa pulled her arm free, anger mixing with her fear. "Stop what?" "Looking for my brother, trying to figure out what they do here." "Trying to get yourself killed," Ben shot back, his voice cracking. "This isn't some corporate mystery, Lyssa. People vanish. That stuff we're working with." He gestured vaguely towards the assembly hall. "It isn't right, just do the work. Survive the 6 months, get out, please." His desperation was genuine, fueled by a terror that mirrored her own. He wasn't an enemy, just someone trying to survive an impossible situation. "I can't, Ben," she said softly, meeting his eyes. "I can't just ignore what happened to Leo, or what I think is happening now." Ben recoiled as if struck, shaking his head. "Then you're on your own," he whispered, his face crumpling. "I can't. I won't get dragged down with you." He turned and hurried away, melting back into the crowd of gray uniforms, leaving Lyssa feeling colder and more isolated than ever. The rest of the shift passed in a haze of exhausting labor and hypervigilance. Lyssa focused on the polymer, searching for flaws, for clues. Once, she was certain she saw a faint, rhythmic pulsing beneath the surface of a torso piece, synchronized with the clicking she now sometimes imagined she could hear even over the factory noise. She scanned it quickly, sending it down the line, feeling like a collaborator in atrocity. As she filed out towards the mess hall for the midday meal, she almost bumped into Corv, the old janitor, sweeping near a junction piled high with discarded packing materials. He didn't look up, continuing his methodical strokes with the broom, but as she passed, he spoke, his voice a low rasp barely audible above the din. "Waste stream assessment today. Sector Gamma runoff pipe west perimeter behind Hydro Unit 3. Filters need checking." He swept a small, metallic object along with the dust, nudging it subtly with the broom head until it rested near Lyssa's foot, careful of contamination. Then he moved on, pushing his cart of debris, disappearing down a service corridor. Lyssa bent down quickly, pretending to adjust her boot, and palmed the object. It was cool metal, heavy for its size, a discarded tool head. No, it was smoother. She slipped it into her pocket without looking at it closely and continued towards the mess hall, her heart pounding. A message, a location, waste stream assessment, gamma runoff, west perimeter. Was he telling her where rejected materials, or worse, were disposed of? Giving her a chance to find evidence, far from the direct surveillance of the main complex. And what was the object he'd given her? The afternoon brought a chilling confirmation of the increased scrutiny. Dr. Von herself appeared on the assembly floor, a rare occurrence. She didn't stop at any specific station. Flanked by 2 impassive guards, she walked slowly along the main aisle between the conveyor lines, her pale eyes sweeping across the workers, the machinery, the components. She moved with an unnerving grace, her white lab coat pristine amidst the grime. Her gaze passed over Lyssa, lingered for a fraction of a second, or was it imagination? Before moving on, the entire section fell silent as she passed, the only sounds the relentless rhythm of the machines. Her presence was a physical weight, a reminder of the absolute power she wielded here. She paused near Line 7's supervisory station, spoke quietly to the supervisor, her expression unreadable, then turned and departed as silently as she had arrived. The tension ratcheted up further. Vaughn was watching, assessing. Back in the relative anonymity of the dormitory after the punishing shift, Lyssa finally dared to examine the object Corv had given her. It wasn't a tool head. It was a small, heavy cylinder of smooth, dark metal, about the size of her thumb. One end was flat, the other capped with what looked like a multifaceted lens or crystal. It felt strangely dense. Holding it up to the weak light, she saw complex symbols etched around the barrel, similar to the markings on the ceramic shard but more intricate. She pressed the flat end. Nothing happened. She tried twisting the lens cap. It wouldn't budge. What was it? A key? A data chip? A marker? Corv wouldn't have given it to her without reason. Waste stream assessment. Gamma runoff. Did this object relate somehow? Lyssa sat on her bunk, the weight of the metal cylinder cool in her palm. Ben's fear, Grix's threats, Vaughn's chilling presence, the memory of the glitchling and the watching doll, it all pressed in on her. Hiding was no longer an option. Vaughn knew someone was probing. It was only a time before she narrowed down the search, before some inevitable mistake betrayed Lyssa. Remaining passive meant waiting for discovery, waiting for recycling. She had to act. She had to find proof, something undeniable, something she could use, maybe even something to bargain with. Or she had to find a way out off this cursed island. Corv's cryptic message and the strange metal cylinder were her only leads. The west perimeter, the runoff pipe behind Hydro Unit 3. It was outside the main complex, potentially less guarded, but investigating the waste stream from Sector Gamma. The place where rejects, mistakes, and unwanted people ended up. It was perhaps the most dangerous gamble yet. She clutched the cylinder tightly. Tonight, she had to go tonight, find the runoff pipe, see what secrets the factories refuse held, before Vaughn found her first. Chapter 8: The Effluent Stream. Waiting for the dormitory to succumb to its uneasy slumber felt longer than the night before. Every rustle, every sigh, grated on Lyssa's raw nerves. Ben Carey's, bunking several beds away now after their confrontation, deliberately kept his back to her, a solid wall of fear and rejection. The isolation pressed in. Once the witching hour approached, signaled by the deeper silence and the shift in the distant factory hum, Lyssa repeated her careful ritual. Easing off the bunk, grabbing the ceramic shard and the dense metal cylinder Corv had given her, she moved towards the vent. The stool scraped, louder this time in her heightened state. She froze, listening. A low groan came from one of the lower bunks, but no one woke. Working faster now, fueled by desperate urgency, she used the shard to undo the screws, her hands surprisingly steady despite the tremor running through her body. She removed the grill, placed it silently atop the locker, and hoisted herself into the suffocating darkness of the duct. Pulling the grill mostly shut behind her, she took a moment, forcing slow breaths into her lungs, trying to calm the frantic pounding in her chest. The stale air, the pervasive dust, the distant hum, it was becoming horrifyingly familiar. But tonight her objective was different. Not Sector Delta, not the nursery. She had to find a way outwards, towards the west perimeter, towards the hydro units and the Sector Gamma runoff. Navigating the vent system blind was still terrifying guesswork. She relied on faint drafts, changes in ambient sound, and sheer luck. She crawled past the junction leading towards Vaughn's lab, shuddering involuntarily, pushing herself onward into unexplored territory. This route felt different. The ducts seemed older, the dust thicker, the metallic tang overlaid with a damp, earthy smell. Was she heading away from the main building, towards the outer walls? She encountered smaller grills occasionally, peering through them cautiously. One offered a glimpse of a deserted corridor lined with humming power conduits. Another showed a storage bay filled with crates stamped with hazard symbols. A third revealed only darkness and the sound of dripping water. She pushed on, following the general direction she hoped was west, guided by the memory of the factory's external layout. The main duct began to slope downwards more steeply. The air grew damper, colder, carrying a truly foul odor now, chemical waste, decay, and something thick and organic, like an abattoir drain. This had to be the way towards the waste processing or outflow systems. Corv's directions echoed in her mind. Gamma runoff pipe, west perimeter, behind Hydro Unit 3. She reached a major vertical shaft. Unlike the one she'd climbed before, this one had moisture slicking its rungs, and the downward draft carried the repellent stench strongly. This must lead towards the lower levels, possibly near the foundation or outflow channels. Taking a steadying breath against the smell, she began the descent, the metal cold and slippery beneath her grip. The shaft seemed to go down a long way. The factory hum receded, replaced by the gurgle and rush of liquids moving through large pipes embedded in the shaft walls. Finally, her feet touched a sludgy floor. She was in what felt like a wider tunnel, circular, perhaps a primary drainage conduit. The stench here was overpowering, making her gag. Water, or something thicker, flowed sluggishly along a channel in the center of the tunnel floor. Where were the hydro units? She moved cautiously along the edge of the tunnel, using the dim emergency lighting spaced far apart that cast long, distorted shadows. The flowing effluent in the central channel was dark, viscous, occasionally swirling around larger, unidentifiable lumps of solid waste. Were those rags, chunks of discarded polymer, or something worse? She forced herself not to look too closely. After navigating 2 sharp bends, she saw it. Ahead, bathed in the sickly green glow of an emergency lamp, was a massive humming structure bolted to the tunnel wall Hydro Unit 3, judging by the faded stenciling. And behind it, emerging from the concrete wall at floor level, was a thick pipe, at least 3 feet in diameter, spilling a sluggish, near-black stream of effluent into the main channel. Sector Gamma runoff. Lyssa approached cautiously, staying close to the tunnel wall. The air near the pipe was thick enough to taste, burning the back of her throat. She scanned the area. No guards, no workers. Just the hum of the hydro unit, the gurgle of the waste stream, and the oppressive silence. This was it. The place where Vaughn's mistakes, her flawed copies, were flushed away. What was she looking for? Evidence, proof, something tangible. She knelt near the mouth of the pipe, trying to peer inside, but the darkness was absolute. The effluent flowed out slowly, thick as molasses. She scanned the sludge pooling around the pipe's opening. Amidst the dark slime and chemical sheen, she saw fragments, chunks of the pale polymer, twisted, discolored, shards of the dark ceramic chassis material, wiry clumps that might have been synthetic hair, but nothing definitive. Nothing that screamed human remains or failed experiment. Just industrial waste, albeit uniquely grotesque waste. Was this a dead end? Had Corv sent her here for nothing? She pulled out the metal cylinder he'd given her, holding it near the runoff stream. Felt significant somehow. Was it meant to react, to measure something? She held it closer to the pipe opening. Still nothing. Frustration mingled with fear. She scanned the pipe itself, the surrounding wall. Were there access panels, inspection hatches? High on the pipe, near where it emerged from the wall, she saw something, a small recessed socket, almost hidden by grime and shadow. It looked vaguely hexagonal. She compared it to the cylinder. The lens end seemed too large, the flat end too simple. Was there another part to it? She turned the cylinder over and over in her hand. Then she noticed it. A tiny, almost invisible seam near the flat end. Pressing hard, she tried to twist it. It resisted, then clicked, rotating slightly. The flat end cap came loose. Inside, recessed within the cylinder body, was not a flat surface, but a precisely machined hexagonal connector, designed to fit the socket on the pipe. Her heart leaped. This wasn't just a marker, it was a key, a diagnostic tool, an access device. She reached up towards the socket on the pipe, her hand trembling. The humming hydro unit provided just enough ambient vibration to make precise alignment difficult. She guided the hexagonal connector into the socket. It slid in with a satisfying click. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum emanated from the cylinder itself. The multifaceted lens on the other end began to glow with a faint, internal blue light. Projected onto the tunnel wall opposite the pipe, a shimmering display flickered into existence. It wasn't text, not numbers. It was a complex shifting diagram, interwoven lines, pulsing nodes, familiar genetic helix symbols intertwined with blocky, alien-looking geometric shapes. Below the main diagram, smaller icons blinked rapidly. Temperature readings, pressure levels, complex chemical formulas scrolling past too quickly to decipher. And one section labeled Biosignature Analysis. Beneath that label, a bar graph was slowly filling. Segment by segment, it crept upwards, showing multiple distinct readings. Most were low background noise levels, perhaps, but 3 bars were significantly higher, labeled only with alphanumeric designations, X997, R04B, and LC1138. Lyssa Chen, 1138, his birth month and day, November 3rd. It couldn't be coincidence. Wishful thinking fueled by terror and hope. But the signature was there, present in the waste stream flowing from Sector Gamma. Not just present, but prominent, higher than the others, designated only by codes. What did it mean? Was it just residual DNA from his work clothes flushed away months ago? Or was it recent? Was something of him, tissue, blood, a rejected component based on his blueprint, currently being processed as waste? The blue light from the cylinder intensified. The diagram on the wall shifted, focusing on the LC1138 signature. New data scrolled rapidly beneath it. Status: fragmented but viable. Replication markers: dormant. Organic mass estimate: fluctuating. Fragmented but viable. Replication markers: dormant. Lyssa felt dizzy, sickened. It sounded like biological material. Leo's biological material, still viable, flushed away like garbage. Where was the rest of him? Was he dead? Turned into a glitchling? Or worse, had Vaughn succeeded in using his blueprint? Was a vessel with Leo's genetic base walking around somewhere, waiting for activation? Suddenly, the cylinder emitted a sharp beep. The projected display changed, flashing a bright red warning symbol, an exclamation point within a triangle. Text appeared below it. Warning: unauthorized access DETECTED. Remote system ping initiated. Trace protocol active. Someone knew. Connecting the device had triggered an alert somewhere in the factory network. They knew someone was accessing the gamma runoff data. They would be coming. Lyssa yanked the cylinder from the socket. The projected display vanished instantly, the blue light dying. She jammed the end cap back on, pocketing the device. She had to get out, back to the vents, back to the dorm. Now. She scrambled back towards the vertical shaft, slipping on the slick floor, the stench burning her lungs. Behind her, she thought she heard a new sound echoing in the tunnels, distant but approaching. Heavy, rhythmic footsteps. Security. She reached the shaft, grabbing the slippery rungs, hauling herself upwards with desperate strength. Her muscles screamed, her hands raw. She climbed blindly into the darkness, listening to the sounds from below. The footsteps were closer now, splashing through the effluent in the tunnel. Flashlight beams sliced through the darkness at the bottom of the shaft. Subject detected. Access shaft C4. A voice bellowed from below. Seal the upper levels. Seal the upper levels. Lyssa climbed faster, terror lending her strength. She reached the horizontal duct she'd entered from, scrambling inside just as heavy clang echoed from below. The sound of a security door slamming shut at the base of the shaft. They were trying to trap her in the lower levels. She crawled frantically back through the dark, damp duct, pushing herself relentlessly. Back towards the main system, back towards the dormitory block. Every sound was amplified, every shadow seemed to move. Was the glitchling still lurking? Were there other things in these lightless tunnels? She forced the thoughts away, focusing only on escape. Retracing her path felt agonizingly slow. Was she going the right way? The darkness offered no landmarks. Finally, she reached the familiar junction, recognized the airflow leading towards her dorm block. Relief warred with the certainty of pursuit. She crawled the last stretch, reached the grill, fumbled it open, and half fell onto the stool below. The screws. She had to get the screws back in. Her fingers were clumsy, slick with grime and sweat. She dropped one, heard it skitter across the concrete. Leaving it, she secured the other three as tightly as she could manage, shoved the stool back, and climbed into her bunk, pulling the blanket up, praying her ragged breathing and trembling wouldn't betray her. Footsteps pounded down the main dormitory corridor outside. Heavy, purposeful, they stopped near her room. Light sliced under the door. Silence. Listening. Waiting. Lyssa held her breath until her lungs burned. After an eternity, the footsteps moved on, checking other rooms, their voices muffled but sharp. They hadn't found her, not yet, but they knew. The cylinder, the data, the LC1138 signature, fragmented but viable. Leo was in the waste stream. And Veridian Dynamics, Dr. Vaughn knew someone had accessed that information. The net was tightening. Isolation was no longer safety, it was vulnerability. She needed help, but who could she possibly trust in this hellish place? Ben had abandoned her. Corv offered cryptic clues but kept his distance. There was no one. Except perhaps the other workers. If she could somehow share what she knew, sow seeds of doubt, of rebellion. It was a desperate thought, likely fatal. But doing nothing felt equally fatal now. The clicking, she realized, wasn't just in the vents or the vessels anymore. It was the sound of the clock running out. Chapter 9: Seeds of Doubt. The summons bell was an auditory assault. Lyssa flinched, jerking awake from a shallow, nightmare-ridden doze. Her body screamed protests, aching muscles, raw skin, a throbbing headache behind her eyes. The dormitory lights flickered on, harsh and unforgiving. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken tension. Yesterday's security sweep had left its mark. Faces were paler, movements more furtive, the usual morning shuffle towards the washrooms imbued with a heightened sense of dread. Lyssa noticed the dropped screw from the vent grill lying near the wall. Someone must have kicked it under a bunk. She didn't dare retrieve it now. She avoided looking towards Ben Carey's bunk. His rejection yesterday stung, but his fear was a tangible thing, a dangerous liability. Today, survival depended on absolute control, on projecting utter normalcy while her insides churned with terror and the sickening knowledge of Leo's, viable fragments swirling in the factory's effluent. The walk to Assembly Hall Beta was unnerving. Security presence had doubled. Gray-uniformed guards stood not just at major junctions but along corridors, their faces impassive, batons held ready. They watched everyone, their gazes lingering. Grix stood at the hall entrance, not speaking, just observing the incoming workers, his expression darker than usual, like a predator assessing weakened prey. The usual pre-shift murmurs were absent. Silence reigned, amplifying the ever-present factory hum. Grix's briefing was brutal. Yesterday's alert was not a drill, he snarled, his voice scraping like metal filings. An infiltrator attempted to access restricted systems. This facility operates on security. Security breaches, his gaze swept the room cold and hard, are unacceptable. Anyone withholding information, anyone assisting unauthorized activity will be identified. Consequences will be final. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The threat hung heavy and suffocating in the air. Production quotas remained elevated. Scrutiny would be absolute. Line 7 felt like a pressure cooker. The supervisors patrolled constantly, their eyes missing nothing. Workers fumbled components more often, the increased pressure leading to errors, which led to more immediate, harsh reprimands. Lyssa forced herself into the rhythm, click, insert, affix, scan, focusing on the physical actions to keep the terror at bay. She felt naked under the presumed gaze of Vaughn, operating somewhere behind the walls, potentially reviewing every camera feed, analyzing every worker's micro-expressions. She concentrated on the polymer, its cool, yielding surface, fragmented but viable. Replication markers dormant. Leo. She risked glances at the other workers. Most were locked in masks of concentration or numb despair. But she noticed small things, a hand trembling as it reached for a tool, eyes darting nervously towards the supervisors, two workers exchanging a fleeting look of shared anxiety before quickly looking away. Fear was pervasive, but was there anything else? Anger, resentment, a shared understanding of the wrongness of this place. It was impossible to tell. Fear bred silence, isolation. Ben Carey's worked opposite her, his face pale, movements jerky. He avoided her eyes completely, focused solely on his station, radiating nervous energy like static electricity. He was locked in survival mode, useless as an ally now, perhaps even a potential risk if pressured. The morning break was tense. Workers clustered in small, silent groups, drinking water quickly before returning to the relative anonymity of their workstations. Lyssa stood alone, scanning the periphery. No sign of Corv. Was he lying low after passing her the cylinder, or had his subtle assistance already been detected? As she turned back towards line 7, a figure blocked her path. Marta Reyes, the head of security, younger than Grixt, with sharp features and an alert, intelligent gaze that seemed out of place amidst the factory's dullness. She held a data tablet. Chen Lyssa. Rey's voice was calm, professional, yet held an undercurrent of steel. Lyssa's heart leaped into her throat. Yes. Standard procedure, Reyes said, her eyes scanning Lyssa's face intently. Just confirming roster details. Your entry file lists previous experience in micro-soldering, correct? Electronic assembly. Lyssa frowned, confused. Yes, years ago, basic components. Why was she asking this? Was it a test? Reyes tapped on her tablet. And your brother, Leo Chen, employed here previously. Did he ever mention specifics about his work in materials reclamation? Any operational details? The question hung in the air, casual yet loaded. This wasn't standard procedure. This was interrogation, light touch but targeted. No, Lyssa said, keeping her voice steady, meeting Rey's gaze directly. He just said it was messy work, handling waste materials. We didn't talk much about specifics. Reyes held her gaze for a long moment, searching. Lyssa forced herself not to look away, not to betray the terror clawing at her insides. Finally, Reyes gave a curt nod. All right, Chen, carry on. She stepped aside, already focusing back on her tablet, dismissing Lyssa. Lyssa walked back to her station on trembling legs. They were probing, checking records, looking for connections, assessing reactions. Rey's sharp eyes had missed nothing. How long until they connected the dots? The missing brother, the vent intrusion, the gamma access alert. The afternoon shift felt impossibly long. The pressure mounted. A machine malfunctioned further down the line, spewing lubricant and causing a temporary halt. Grixt descended like a fury, roaring at the maintenance crew, his face puce. In the brief chaos, workers exchanged anxious glances, a shared moment of vulnerability under the foreman's rage. Lyssa saw an opportunity, small and incredibly risky. Across the aisle on line 8 worked the woman from her dorm room, the one with the scraped-back hair and the air of weary resilience. She wasn't overtly rebellious, but Lyssa had seen flickers of something behind the resignation, a tightening of the jaw when Grixt passed, a fleeting look of contempt towards a preening supervisor. Her name, Lyssa had learned from a roster list glimpsed earlier, was Ilara. During the height of the commotion surrounding the broken machine, while supervisors were distracted, Lyssa leaned slightly across the stationary belt towards Ben's side, pretending to retrieve a dropped tool near the aisle. Ilara was momentarily looking her way, her expression guarded. Lyssa met her eyes. Keeping her hand low, partially cupped, Lyssa held up the ceramic shard, angling it so the weak factory light caught the strangely etched lines for just a second. She didn't speak, didn't gesture further. Just held Ilara's gaze for a heartbeat, letting the shard glint, before quickly pocketing it and straightening up as if nothing had happened. Did Ilara see? Did she understand it was deliberate? Did the etched patterns mean anything to her? Ilara's expression didn't change. She simply looked away, back towards her own workstation, her face an unreadable mask. Had Lyssa imagined the faint widening of her eyes, the almost imperceptible intake of breath, or was it wishful thinking? The risk settled heavily in Lyssa's stomach. She might have just signed her own death warrant or Ilara's. If Ilara reported her, it was over. If someone else saw the exchange. But doing nothing felt like waiting for the executioner's axe. She had planted a seed, a tiny, desperate question mark in the oppressive soil of the factory's fear. Would it bear poisoned fruit or wither unnoticed? The klaxon signaling the end of the shift finally blared. Workers moved with sluggish haste, eager to escape the oppressive scrutiny of the factory floor. Lyssa kept her head down, avoiding eye contact, joining the silent stream heading towards the dormitories. Her nerves were frayed wires. Every footstep behind her seemed like impending doom. As she reached the entrance corridor to dormitory Block C, a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder. Lyssa froze, her blood running cold. She turned slowly. Foreman Grixt loomed over her, his face shadowed in the dim corridor light, his expression unreadable but radiating menace. His grip on her shoulder was iron-hard. "Chen," his voice was a low growl, devoid of its usual barking anger, which was somehow more terrifying. "Dr. Vaughn wants to see you. Now." Chapter 10. The Doctor's Sanctum. Lyssa's legs felt like concrete pillars, unwilling to move. Grixt's grip was inescapable, his thick fingers digging painfully into the muscle of her shoulder. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of exhaustion and fear. Vaughn wanted to see her. Now, this was it. They knew. The vent crawl, the cylinder, the runoff data, somehow, they knew it was her. "This way," Grixt growled, pulling her slightly off balance. He didn't lead her towards the administrative offices or the grim gates of Sector Gamma. Instead, he steered her back towards the main factory complex, towards the sealed, biohazard-marked door at the far end of Assembly Hall Beta. Sector Delta, the Doctor's private domain. The Assembly Hall was mostly deserted now, the machines powered down into standby mode, casting long, skeletal shadows under the minimal safety lighting. The usual hum was replaced by a lower, expectant thrum. Two guards, armed and impassive, stood flanking the Delta door. They stepped aside without acknowledgement as Grixt approached, shoving Lyssa forward slightly. Grixt didn't knock. He placed his hand on a biometric panel beside the door. A soft chime sounded, and the heavy door slid open with a whisper of hydraulics, revealing not a grimy factory corridor but an airlock chamber, walls gleaming white, air smelling sharp and sterile like ozone. "Inside," Grix commanded, releasing her shoulder abruptly. He remained outside, a hulking silhouette against the dimmer light of the assembly hall, arms crossed. The door slid shut behind Lyssa, sealing her in the small chamber. For a moment nothing happened. Then jets hissed from nozzles in the ceiling and walls, bathing her in a fine mist that carried a faint antiseptic scent. An air purification cycle. It did little to cleanse the greasy grime from her uniform or the terror gripping her heart. After perhaps 30 seconds, the hissing stopped, and the inner airlock door slid open. Lyssa stepped through, hesitant, into Dr. Kalen Vaughn's inner sanctum. It was the lab she had glimpsed from the vent, but seeing it from ground level was overwhelming. Larger than it had appeared from above, spotlessly clean, filled with gleaming chrome and glass. Banks of humming machinery lined the walls, displaying complex biological and chemical data on integrated screens. Glassware bubbled with unknown reagents. Robotic arms lay dormant beside sterile work surfaces. And dominating the center, still tilted under the bright surgical lamps, was the examination table. The vessel she had seen yesterday was gone. In its place lay something covered by a sterile white sheet, its form vaguely humanoid but disturbingly indistinct beneath the drape. Dr. Vaughn stood near a bank of monitors, her back to Lyssa. She didn't turn immediately, seemingly absorbed in the shifting data on the screen. She still wore the pristine white lab coat, her dark hair pulled back severely. The silence in the lab was profound, broken only by the low hum of equipment and the faint bubbling from a nearby bioreactor tank filled with murky, nutrient-rich fluid. "Lyssa Chen," Vaughn finally spoke, her voice cool and precise without turning around. "Recruited 6 weeks ago. Previous experience, adequate low-level electronic assembly. Family relative, Lyssa Chen, formerly assigned materials reclamation, contract terminated, subject decommissioned." The casual clinical confirmation of Leo's fate hit Lyssa harder than a physical blow. Decommissioned. Not transferred, not disappeared. Terminated. Processed like faulty equipment, like waste. Grief and rage surged through her, a burning tide threatening to swamp her fear. She clenched her fists, biting back a cry. Vaughn turned slowly, her pale eyes fixing on Lyssa. There was no anger in her expression, no accusation, only a detached, scientific curiosity. "Your recent activities have shown unexpected initiative, crawling through ventilation shafts, accessing secure data streams via restricted diagnostic ports, demonstrating resourcefulness exceeding your documented profile." She gestured vaguely towards a monitor displaying grainy, infrared footage, unmistakably Lyssa peering down from the vent grill above the lab. "We had assumed GR07 would prove a sufficient deterrent. Clearly, we underestimated your motivation." Lyssa stood frozen, unable to speak. Confession was pointless, denial impossible. Vaughn held all the cards. "The cylinder," Vaughn continued, picking up the small, dense metal object from a nearby tray, Core of cylinder. They must have tracked its signal, retrieved it after Lyssa lost it in the dorm. Property of Viridian Dynamics Advanced Research. Sophisticated diagnostic tool, not intended for operative-level handling. Its unauthorized use near the gamma effluent stream triggered several flags. Cross-referencing recent security alerts, dormitory manifests, and psychological stress indicators among the workforce led, quite efficiently, to you. Vaughn placed the cylinder back on the tray. Your brother, Leo, his genetic profile possessed certain unique markers, highly desirable for Project Chimera. Unfortunately, his psychological resilience proved inadequate. Integration instability resulted in cascading biological failure during preliminary gestation. She waved a dismissive hand towards the unseen sector gamma. Regrettable waste of potential. His core sequence, however, remains archived. Fragmentary data in the waste stream is merely residual biomatter from the decommissioning process. Nothing viable, I assure you. Lies. The cylinder had red viable, replication markers dormant. Was Vaughn deliberately misleading her? Or did the cylinder provide data even the doctor wasn't privy to? Why? Lyssa finally found her voice raspy and strained. Why are you doing this? What is Project Chimera? What are those vessels for? A faint smile touched Vaughn's lips, devoid of warmth. Curiosity, a commendable trait, albeit dangerous in this environment. She walked slowly towards the sheet-covered table. Project Chimera represents the next stage of evolution, Miss Chen. A synthesis. The limitations of baseline human biology, emotion, physical decay, individuality are inefficiencies, obstacles to be overcome. She reached the table. Our off-world partners, she continued, her voice dropping slightly, gaining an almost zealous intensity, possess consciousness without suitable physical form. They offer knowledge, advancement beyond human comprehension. In return, they require vessels, durable, adaptable, controllable biological hosts tailored to specific operational parameters. She gestured towards the hidden shape on the table. We provide the hardware, they provide the occupants. Alien consciousness. It wasn't just a wild theory. It was real. Lyssa felt a profound, disorienting wave of nausea. This factory wasn't just building advanced dolls. It was building bodies for alien minds. Your brother's sequence was promising, Vaughn said, her eyes gleaming with scientific fervor. But ultimately flawed. We require resilience, adaptability, the capacity to endure integration without systemic collapse. Her gaze locked onto Lyssa again, sharp, appraising. Your recent exploits, your survival instinct, your tenacity in seeking information. These suggest a potentially superior genetic profile, perhaps even exceeding your brother's initial promise. The implication hit Lyssa with chilling force. Vaughn wasn't just interrogating her. She was evaluating her, assessing her DNA's potential value for the project. What do you want from me? Lyssa whispered, dread coiling in her stomach. Cooperation, Vaughn stated simply. Your unauthorized knowledge makes you a security risk. Standard procedure dictates decommissioning. She let the word hang in the air. However, your demonstrated attributes present an alternative. Voluntary participation in Project Chimera. Contribute your genetic material willingly. Assist in refining the integration process. Your survival instincts could provide invaluable data for stabilizing vessel consciousness. Lyssa stared at her, horrified. You want me to help you put aliens into bodies made from stolen DNA to become, like my brother, decommissioned when I'm no longer useful? Survival is rarely offered on such favorable terms, Miss Chen, Vaughn countered coolly. The alternative is Sector Gamma, immediate, unanesthetized biological reclamation, far less pleasant than contributing to the future of consciousness. She paused, letting the threat sink in. Consider your options, your brother's fate or a role in transcendence. She stepped closer to the examination table. Perhaps a demonstration is in order to help you appreciate the potential. With a deliberate movement, Vaughn reached down and pulled back the sterile white sheet. Lyssa recoiled, stifling a scream. It wasn't a finished vessel. It wasn't human. It was GR-07, the Glitchling. The horror from the vents lay strapped to the table, thick leather restraints barely containing its shuddering, malformed body. It was a grotesque amalgamation of mismatched polymer parts fused crudely with poolsing, discolored organic tissue. Multiple limbs, some ending in crude claws, others in melted stubs of plastic, twitched spasmodically. Patches of synthetic skin stretched taut over bulging tumor-like growths. Worst of all was the head, a distorted mockery of a human face. Ceramic plates cracked and fused into weeping organic matter. One eye a milky white orb, the other a multifaceted insectoid lens poolsing with dim light. A low, constant gurgling sound emanated from a ragged hole where its mouth should be. It writhed against its bonds, emitting low moans of agony and confusion. A regrettable failure, Vaughn remarked, seemingly unfazed by the monstrosity. Unstable sequence integration, but even failures provide data. She picked up a long, needle-tipped instrument. Observe the stimulus response. Before Vaughn could apply the instrument, the Glitchling's insectoid eyes swiveled, focusing directly on Lyssa. A flicker of something recognition, malice, crossed its horrifying features. It strained against its restraints, the gurgling sound rising in pitch to a choked, wet shriek. Remarkable, Vaughn murmured, watching the Glitchling's reaction with intense interest. A specific response to your pheromonal signature, perhaps. Fascinating. Lyssa felt bile rise in her throat. This creature, this failed experiment, might contain fragments of dozens of stolen DNA sequences. It was suffering, tormented, trapped in a prison of corrupted flesh. And Vaughn saw only data. Choose, Miss Chen, Vaughn said softly, turning back to her, the needle gleaming under the lights. Cooperation and survival, or join the waste stream. Lyssa's mind raced. Cooperation was unthinkable, a betrayal of Leo, of herself. Refusal meant immediate death, becoming another horror like the thing on the table before being dissolved in gamma. Was there a third option? Could she fight, escape? She glanced towards the airlock door. Grix would be waiting. The guards, impossible odds. But then she saw it. On a control panel near Vaughn, momentarily ignored as the doctor focused on Lyssa, a specific icon blinked steadily, the same red triangle warning symbol that had flashed on the cylinder's projected display. Unauthorized access detected. Vaughn hadn't completely shut down the trace protocol. Perhaps she couldn't remotely, or perhaps she'd left it active, hopping to lure Lyssa out, which meant someone else might have seen the alert too. Corv. Raise. Was it possible someone else in this nightmare factory knew or suspected and was monitoring the system? It was the faintest glimmer of hope, almost certainly false, but it was all she had. Buy time, feign consideration, look for an opportunity, however slim. I need to think, Lyssa stammered, forcing the words out, trying to mask the revulsion and terror. This is a lot to process. Vaughn studied her, her eyes narrowed slightly. Time is a resource I allocate sparingly, Miss Chen. You have 5 minutes. Contemplate your future. She turned back towards the monitor, seemingly dismissing Lyssa, but Lyssa knew the dismissal was an illusion. Vaughn was watching her reflection in the screen, waiting for her decision or her mistake. The glitchling on the table continued to writhe, its single insect eye fixed on Lyssa, a silent, horrifying testament to the cost of failure. 5 minutes. The clock was ticking, louder now than ever before. Chapter 11. Calculated Chaos. 5 minutes. The silence in the lab stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by the soft hum of machinery and the wet, gurgling moans of the glitchling strapped to the table. Lyssa stood frozen, her mind racing, desperately trying to formulate a plan beyond immediate suicidal resistance. Vaughn remained ostensibly focused on her monitors, but Lyssa felt the weight of her attention, precise and predatory. Grixt waited outside the airlock, 2 guards beyond him. Impossible odds. Her gaze flickered between Vaughn, the glitchling, the control panel displaying the blinking red warning icon, and the gleaming surgical instruments laid out neatly on a nearby tray. Cooperation was death by degrees. Refusal was immediate, agonizing oblivion in Sector Gamma. Fighting seemed insane. But Vaughn had made a mistake, showing her the glitchling GR07. It wasn't just a failure, it was Vaughn's failure kept alive for study. It responded to stimuli to her. It was restrained but clearly possessed some residual strength, fueled by pain and corrupted biology. Could that be leveraged? And the blinking icon, unauthorized access. Someone else might know. Could she create a diversion? Something chaotic enough to confuse Vaughn, to potentially alert whoever else might be watching the system, to give Lyssa a sliver of a chance to act. Her eyes fell on a heavy metal canister connected by thick hoses to one of the complex machines lining the wall. The label, stark black on yellow, read, VX9 polymer solvent, extreme caution, highly volatile, a solvent for the polymer flesh. What would happen if? 3 minutes left. Lyssa took a small, deliberate step towards the examination table, as if moving closer to inspect the glitchling, feigning horrified fascination. It seems to be in pain, she murmured, keeping her voice trembling slightly. Pain is merely unprocessed neurological data, Vaughn replied without turning, her tone dismissive. Its suffering provides valuable parameters on integration rejection thresholds. Lyssa took another step, bringing her closer to the tray of surgical instruments. Vaughn's reflection in the monitor showed her watching Lyssa intently now. 1 minute left. It had to be now. In one fluid motion, Lyssa lunged. Not towards Vaughn, not towards the door. She grabbed the heaviest instrument on the tray, a solid metal device resembling a specialized clamp or bone shears, and pivoted, hurling it with all her strength not at Vaughn, but at the thick glass viewport of the nearby bioreactor tank, the one filled with bubbling, murky fluid. The metal tool struck the glass with a sickening crunch. It didn't shatter completely, but a network of cracks instantly spread across the surface, and a high-pressure stream of the foul-smelling nutrient fluid erupted into the pristine lab. Vaughn spun around, shock momentarily overriding her cold composure. "Containment breach! Lab integrity compromised!" she yelled, slapping buttons on her control panel. Alarms shrieked to life, sirens wailing within the lab and Lyssa hoped, echoing throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an emergency pulse. This was Lyssa's chance. While Vaughn was distracted by the unexpected containment breach, Lyssa didn't run for the door. She darted towards the examination table where the Glitchling, agitated by the alarms and the sudden chaos, thrashed violently against its restraints. "Bad idea, Miss Chen," Vaughn snarled, recovering quickly, reaching for something clipped to her belt, a compact energy weapon, a tranquilizer. Lyssa ignored her. Reaching the table, she didn't attack the Glitchling. She slammed the heel of her boot down hard onto the central buckle mechanism of the thick leather straps holding the creature's torso. The mechanism, perhaps weakened by GR-07's constant struggling, or simply not designed for such direct impact, snapped with a loud crack. The Glitchling, partially freed, let out a piercing, wet shriek, a sound of raw agony and unrestrained fury. It ripped its arms free from the now loosened upper restraints, fused claws and plastic shards tearing through the leather. Its single insectal eye fixed on Vaughn, the source of its torment. "GR-07, stand down," Vaughn commanded, raising her weapon. But the creature was beyond control. Fueled by pain and a primal urge to lash out, it ignored its creator. It lunged, not at Lyssa, but sideways off the table, landing in a grotesque heap on the floor before scrambling with surprising speed directly towards Dr. Vaughn. Vaughn fired her weapon. A beam of focused energy hit the Glitchling's shoulder, vaporizing a chunk of polymer and organic matter, causing the creature to screech again, but it didn't stop its momentum. It slammed into Vaughn, knocking her off balance, claws flailing. The weapon clattered across the floor. This was chaos. Alarms blared, lights flashed, nutrient fluid sprayed from the cracked bioreactor. Vaughn wrestled with the enraged, malformed creature she had created. Lyssa didn't hesitate. She scrambled past the struggling pair, heading for the airlock door. She slapped the control panel beside the inner door. It didn't respond, overridden by the emergency lockdown triggered by Vaughn or the containment breach. Trapped. Lyssa frantically scanned the panel. Was there a manual release? A code override? Behind her, Vaughn screamed, a sound of pain and fury as the Glitchling's claws found purchase. Lyssa risked a glance back. Vaughn managed to shove the creature away momentarily, creating space. Her lab coat was torn, blood blooming on her arm. Her face was a mask of cold rage. She spotted the energy weapon lying near the struggling Glitchling. No time. Lyssa turned back to the door. Beside the main panel was a smaller, Simpler one marked emergency pressurization override, a covered red button. Lyssa flipped up the cover and slammed her palm onto the button. With a violent hiss of escaping air, the inner airlock door shuddered and slid open halfway before jamming, likely damaged by the emergency protocols or the general chaos. Outside in the airlock chamber, Grix stood, momentarily bewildered by the alarms and the sight of the half-open door revealing the pandemonium within Vaughn's lab. Lyssa didn't wait for him to react. She threw herself through the partial opening, scraping her side against the metal edge, stumbling into the airlock chamber. "Stop her!" Vaughn shrieked from within the lab, momentarily distracted from the glitchling. Grix reacted instantly, lunging towards Lyssa, his massive hands reaching. She dodged desperately, scrambling towards the outer airlock door. She slammed the control panel beside it, locked down. Of course. Grix was almost upon her. She braced herself against the wall, adrenaline surging. Just as his hands were about to close around her neck, the outer door hissed open unexpectedly. Standing there were not the two guards. Instead, Marta Reyes, the security chief, stood framed in the doorway, her service pistol raised, not aimed at Lyssa but past her, towards Grix. Behind Reyes, several regular security guards looked on, weapons lowered, confused but holding their positions. "Grix, stand down," Reyes commanded, her voice sharp, authoritative, cutting through the alarm's wail. Grix halted, surprised by Reyes's intervention. He hesitated, glancing back towards the inner door where Vaughn could be heard struggling, then back at Reyes's steady aim. "Reyes, what is the meaning of this?" "Vaughn's orders." "Vaughn's authority is temporarily suspended pending investigation into multiple containment breaches and unsanctioned biological incidents," Reyes stated crisply. Her eyes met Lyssa for a fraction of a second. Was that a flicker of understanding, or just procedural coldness? The intruder alert, the gamma effluent contamination, and now this. She gestured towards the chaos visible through the jammed inner door. "Plant security protocols dictate containment and assessment by ranking security personnel. That's me." Lyssa realized what must have happened. The blinking red icon, the system alert Vaughn hadn't shut down, Reyes must have seen it too. As head of security, perhaps she had secondary access or monitoring capabilities. The escalating alerts, the containment breach from the reactor, the glitchling escaping, the emergency pressurization override must have forced her hand, giving her the justification she needed to intervene against Vaughn's apparent authority, possibly suspecting something was deeply wrong. Grix looked uncertain, caught between Vaughn's presumed power and Reyes's invoked protocols and drawn weapon. The glitchling shrieked again from within the lab. "My orders are clear, Foreman," Reyes repeated, her aim unwavering. "Stand down." Grix slowly, reluctantly, lowered his massive hands, taking a step back from Lyssa, his face contorted with resentment. "Chen," Reyes snapped, her attention focused back on Lyssa. "You're coming with me, debriefing." She didn't sound friendly, but she wasn't pointing the gun at her either. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't Vaughn's lab or Sector Gamma. It was another chance, however slim. Lyssa nodded numbly, still trembling, glancing back at the inner door. Vaughn's screams had stopped. Had she subdued the glitchling? Or— "Move," Reyes ordered. She gestured with her weapon for Lyssa to precede her out of the airlock, back into the relative sanity of the assembly hall, leaving Grix fuming and the unresolved horror of Sector Delta contained, for now, behind a jammed door and the wailing alarms. Reyes's guards fell into step behind them, forming a protective cordon, their expressions a mixture of confusion and apprehension. The seeds of doubt had borne unexpected, chaotic fruit. The factory's rigid structure was cracking. Chapter 12: Fractured Authority. The walk away from Sector Delta was surreal. Alarms still blared throughout the complex. Red emergency lights pulsed rhythmically, casting the familiar corridors in an infernal glow. Workers, drawn from their dorms or halted mid-task by the facility-wide alert, huddled in uncertain groups, whispering anxiously, their faces reflecting fear and confusion. Gray-uniformed security personnel directed traffic, trying to maintain order amidst the chaos Lyssa had unleashed. Reyes marched Lyssa forward, pistols still held at a low ready, her expression tight and unreadable. The guards formed a tight escort, keeping curious workers at bay, their own uncertainty visible beneath their professional demeanor. They weren't heading towards the dormitories or the standard holding cells. Reyes led them towards a different sector, administration, judging by the cleaner floors and the occasional potted, unhealthy-looking plant. They reached a door marked Security Chief M. Reyes. Reyes deactivated the lock with a keycard and ushered Lyssa inside, the guards taking up positions outside the door. The office was small, functional, dominated by a large desk covered with monitors displaying security feeds from across the island. Maps of the facility lined one wall. It was sparse, impersonal, but felt miles away from the horrors of the factory floor and Vaughn's lab. Reyes waved Lyssa towards a simple metal chair opposite the desk, then holstered her pistol, though her hand rested near it. "Report," Reyes commanded curtly, sitting down behind the desk, her eyes fixed on Lyssa. "Everything. Why were you in Vaughn's lab? Start from the beginning." Lyssa hesitated. Could she trust Reyes? The security chief had intervened, seemingly opposing Vaughn and Grix, citing protocol. But was it genuine? Or just a different faction vying for control in this nightmare? Reyes's sharp gaze offered no comfort, only demanding efficiency. But what choice did Lyssa have? Vaughn knew everything. Grix wanted her dead. Reyes was the only one who had offered even a semblance of procedural action over immediate termination. And Reyes had questioned her about Leo earlier, suggesting she might already harbor suspicions. Taking a deep breath, Lyssa began. She recounted finding the recruitment ad, her search for Leo, the unnerving atmosphere of the factory, Ben Carey's warnings, the strange polymer components. She described Corv's cryptic clues, the venture into the vents, witnessing Vaughn's work, the encounter with the glitchling the cylinder Corv gave her, the horrifying discovery in the gamma effluent stream, LC1138, fragmented but viable. She detailed Vaughn's summons, the chilling explanation of Project Chimera, the off-world partners, the demand for cooperation under threat of decommissioning, seeing GR07 on the table. Finally, she explained her desperate gamble, causing the diversion, freeing the glitchling, hopping the chaos might provide an escape or trigger an intervention. She didn't embellish, didn't plead, just laid out the facts as she knew them, her voice low and steady despite the tremor beneath. Reyes listened impassively, her expression unchanging, occasionally tapping commands into her console, likely cross-referencing Lyssa's account with security logs, personnel files, system alerts. When Lyssa finished, silence filled the small office, broken only by the distant wail of the alarms, now slowly winding down. Lyssa Chen, Reyes said finally, looking at a file displayed on one of her monitors. Contract terminated 3 months ago. Official reason: gross negligence leading to contamination incident, materials reclamation. Decommissioning authorized by Dr. Vaughn, countersigned by Foreman Grix. She paused. Your diagnostic cylinder access matches the timeline of his disappearance almost exactly. The viable fragment's reading is anomalous. Official logs show complete biological destruction via incineration. Vaughn lied, Lyssa stated flatly. She admitted his sequence was valuable, that he suffered integration instability. She said the fragments were just residual, but the cylinder read differently. Reyes tapped thoughtfully on the desk. Dr. Vaughn operates with significant autonomy, granted by Viridian Dynamics command structure, citing the sensitive nature of Project Chimera. Her security protocols often supersede standard facility measures. Grix enforces her directives on the factory floor. She looked directly at Lyssa. I suspected operational irregularities for months, discrepancies in supply manifests, unusual energy signatures from Sector Delta, worker disappearances exceeding projected attrition rates. Your brother wasn't the first decommissioning logged under questionable circumstances. So Reyes had been suspicious. Lyssa's chaotic intrusion had simply forced the issue into the open. Why didn't you act sooner? A flicker of frustration crossed Reyes's face. Against Vaughn, against Viridian Command. I'm Chief of Security for Plant 7, Chen, not a corporate auditor with off-island authority. Vaughn holds clearance levels far exceeding mine. Grix commands loyalty through fear among a significant portion of the workforce and some of my own guards. Direct confrontation without concrete proof. She gestured vaguely towards the chaotic feeds on her monitors. Proof like multiple containment failures, escaped bioforms, and direct threats to facility integrity would have been professional suicide. Likely literal suicide. The alarms finally cut out, plunging the facility back into the uneasy quiet of its normal operational hum, now overlaid with a nervous tension. Vaughn's off-world partners, Reyes mused, looking back at her screen, consistent with encrypted high-bandwidth transmissions originating from Sector Delta, routed through shielded relays, bypasses standard comms channels, content unknown, clearance level Omega. She shook her head slightly. Above my pay grade. So what happens now? Lyssa asked, the adrenaline beginning to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and chilling uncertainty. You intervened. You have my testimony. You have the system logs from the alerts. Now, Reyes said, leaning forward, her voice dropping, we have a fractured authority. Vaughn is contained for the moment in Sector Delta. I assume GR-07 is either subdued or destroyed, but Delta remains sealed under biohazard protocols. Grixt is furious but neutralized as long as my guards hold ranks. His loyalty is to Vaughn and the project, not facility procedure. I have asserted control based on safety protocols, but it's temporary. Veridian Command will be alerted off-island. They will investigate. And Vaughn will tell them I'm an infiltrator, a saboteur, Lyssa said bitterly. She'll fabricate logs, blame me for everything. Precisely, Reyes agreed. Unless we provide command with something more compelling, proof of Vaughn's unsanctioned activities, the true nature of Project Chimera, the misuse of personnel, the biological hazards. She tapped the screen showing Leo's file. The anomalous, viable fragments. The diagnostic cylinder gave you that reading. If that data is accurate and contradicts Vaughn's official complete destruction report, it could prove she's lying, falsifying records, Lyssa realized. Maybe covering up ongoing experiments on pieces of him. The thought was grotesque, but horribly plausible given Vaughn's detached amorality. Possibly, Reyes conceded. But we need that data confirmed. The cylinder you used, where is it? Vaughn had it in the lab. Reyes swore under her breath. Retrieving anything from a sealed Sector Delta right now is impossible. Vaughn controls the internal environmental systems and security overrides from within. She thought for a moment, fingers drumming on the desk. The effluent stream itself. You said the cylinder analyzed the runoff directly. If Lyssa Chen's viable biological signature is present in the gamma waste outflow, a direct sample analysis would corroborate your claim and contradict Vaughn's incineration logs. Go back down there. Lyssa felt a chill despite the relative safety of the office. To the runoff pipe. It's the most direct route to potentially verifiable proof, Reyes stated. Security patrols will be heightened facility-wide, but the lower drainage conduits, they are less monitored, harder to access. Vaughn wouldn't expect an immediate return to that location. She looked at Lyssa intently. I can provide a secure escort to the conduit access point, perhaps create a diversionary alert elsewhere to draw patrols. But you would have to collect the sample yourself. My presence, or that of my guards, in the lower levels would be too suspicious if discovered later. Plausible deniability. Lyssa hesitated. Returning to that foul tunnel, knowing what horrors originated from Gamma, felt like walking willingly into a monster's maw. But Reyes was right. It was the best, perhaps only, chance to get concrete proof against Vaughn, proof that might save Lyssa from decommissioning and potentially expose the entire horrific project. Proof that might somehow be justice for Leo. There's something else, Lyssa said suddenly, remembering the feeling in the vents, the doll in the nursery. The vessels, the finished ones, I think they might be aware. I saw one move. It looked right at me. Reyes frowned. The dolls. Vaughn's project specifications list them as inert biological chassis awaiting consciousness integration. Latent awareness is not documented. Maybe Vaughn doesn't know the full extent of what she's creating, Lyssa insisted. Or maybe the off-world partners are already exerting some influence. The memory of the doll's blank, knowing eyes sent a shiver down her spine. Reyes considered this, making a note on her console. Another factor, unpredictable variables. She stood up abruptly. Time is critical. Vaughn will be attempting to re-establish contact with Command to spin her narrative. Grixt will be rallying loyalists. We need that sample. Are you capable, Chen? Lyssa met Ray's gaze, fear warred with grim determination. Yes, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Get me to the access point. I'll get the sample. Ray's nodded curtly. Gear up. Standard biosampling kit from my stores. Minimal equipment, fast insertion. She moved towards a supply locker. Let's hope the factory's filth holds the key to bringing this entire operation down. The brief truce was over. The next move in the deadly game had begun. Chapter 13. Below the Threshold. Ray's worked fast, her movements precise and efficient. From a locked cabinet, she produced a small, compartmentalized kit containing sterile collection vials, long-handled swabs, sealing tape, and labeling materials. She also handed Lyssa a compact respirator mask, far superior to the flimsy paper ones sometimes available on the factory floor, and a pair of thick, chemical-resistant gloves. Standard Level 2 biohazard protection, Ray's explained, her voice low and urgent. Should be adequate for handling effluent samples, assuming no direct contact with undiluted gamma discharge. The respirator filters particulates and most common industrial vapors, but prolonged exposure down there is still inadvisable. She tapped coordinates onto her wrist-mounted communicator. I've initiated a low-priority maintenance alert for atmospheric sensor malfunction in Sector Epsilon, opposite side of the facility. Should draw some patrol resources away from the west perimeter drainage access. She then handed Lyssa a small, powerful flashlight with a focused beam and a simple, encrypted radio clipped to her belt. Emergency comms only. Channel secure but keep transmissions brief. 1 click for all clear proceeding, 2 clicks for minor issue delay, 3 clicks for abort immediate extraction required. Understand? Lyssa nodded, clipping the radio securely, her fingers fumbling slightly with the unfamiliar gear. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The access point is maintenance shaft C4, same one you used before apparently, Ray's continued, checking a schematic on her main screen. Leads directly to the lower drainage conduit. We'll escort you to the shaft entrance. From there, you're on your own. Get the sample, multiple swabs, multiple vials if possible. Focus on denser particulate matter near the pipe outflow, seal everything meticulously. Label with time and location. Get back to the shaft. We'll monitor comms and the shaft entrance. 15 minutes maximum once you're inside the conduit. Any longer, we assume compromise and abort. 15 minutes. It sounded impossibly short to navigate the foul tunnel, collect samples beside the gamma pipe, and return up the slick, hazardous shaft. Ready? Ray's asked, her gaze sharp. Lyssa took a deep breath, adjusted the respirator over her nose and mouth. The seal felt tight, the filtered air strangely clean after the factory's constant chemical tang, and nodded again. Ready. 2 of Ray's most trusted guards, faces grim and set, escorted them. They moved quickly and quietly through service corridors, avoiding main thoroughfares. The brief period of overt alarm had passed, but the factory remained tense, watchful. They encountered few other personnel. Those they did pass averted their eyes, clearly unwilling to get involved in whatever internal power struggle was unfolding. They reached shaft C4. The heavy access hatch at this upper level stood slightly ajar. Perhaps security hadn't fully secured it after the earlier chase. Reyes scanned the corridor quickly. Empty. Go, she commanded Lyssa quietly. Maintain radio silence unless necessary. Move fast. Lyssa slipped through the opening, pulling the heavy hatch almost closed behind her. The familiar darkness of the shaft enveloped her, but this time the stench rising from below was expected, though no less repulsive. She switched on the flashlight Reyes had given her. Its powerful beam cut through the oppressive blackness, illuminating the slick, corroded rungs and the moisture weeping down the shaft walls. She began the descent, moving as quickly as safety allowed. The flashlight beam danced ahead, picking out patches of slime, rusted metal, and the dark openings of intersecting ducts she had crawled through before. She didn't allow herself to think about the glitchling, about Vaughn, about the watching dolls. Focus on the task. Get the sample. Get out. Reaching the bottom, she stepped out into the main drainage conduit. The flashlight beam sliced through the humid, stinking air, reflecting off the sluggishly flowing effluent in the central channel. The sickly green emergency lights seemed dimmer than before, casting long, wavering shadows. The place felt colder, damper, more menacing. She moved towards Hydro Unit 3, its heavy hum a low thrumming beneath the gurgle of the waste stream. Her flashlight beam swept across the tunnel floor, picking out debris, discarded fragments, the dark stains of unknown substances. She reached the humming hydro unit and moved behind it, towards the source of her terror and hope, the gamma runoff pipe. The outflow seemed slower today, thicker, almost clotted. The smell was intense, stinging her eyes even through the respirator. She knelt near the pipe's mouth, aiming her flashlight beam directly into the sluggish black stream spilling into the main channel. Visible fragments swirled within the viscous fluid, polymer shards, unrecognizable organic matter, dark fibrous clumps. Taking out the collection kit, she donned the chemical-resistant gloves. Her hands felt clumsy, shaky. She unscrewed the cap from the first sterile vial. Using the long-handled swab, she reached carefully into the thickest part of the outflow, right at the pipe's opening, swirling it gently, trying to capture particulate matter, not just the foul liquid. The swab came back coated in black, greasy sludge, embedded with tiny pale flecks. She deposited the swab head into the vial, sealed it tightly, and slapped on a pre-printed label, marking the time with a waterproof pen. One sample secured. Reyes wanted multiples. Lyssa repeated the process, taking a second sample from slightly deeper within the pipe's outflow, and a third from the accumulated sludge right at the edge of the main channel where the gamma effluent pooled before mixing further. Each vial was carefully sealed, labeled. The entire process took perhaps 5 minutes, but felt like an hour, every second amplifying the sense of dread, the feeling of being watched even in this deserted, subterranean hell. Samples secured. Now, get out. She packed the vials carefully back into their protective case, pocketed it securely inside her uniform, and stood up, sweeping the flashlight beam around one last time before retreating. The beam caught something near the base of the hydro unit, tucked away in the shadow where the machine met the tunnel wall. Not just random debris. It was a doll. Lyssa froze, her blood running cold. It wasn't one of the completed nursery vessels. This one was smaller, cruder, like an early prototype or perhaps something assembled from discarded parts. Its polymer skin was mismatched, scarred, one arm missing, replaced with a crude metal rod. Its clothing was torn rags. Its eyes, however, were wide, glassy, and fixed directly on her. They held a look of terrified awareness, of pleading. And unlike the nursery doll, this one wasn't moving. It sat propped against the wall, utterly still, yet radiating an aura of silent, desperate communication. Was it another reject? Something that had somehow escaped Gamma's decommissioning process and found its way down here? Or had someone placed it here? Corv. Lyssa took a cautious step closer. As her light fell fully upon it, she saw something clutched tightly in its remaining hand. A small, flat piece of metal, like a data chip or an ID tag. Her radio clicked once. Ray's signal, all clear proceeding, time was up. She needed to leave now, but the doll, the tag. Torn, Lyssa made a split-second decision. She couldn't leave it. Reaching down quickly, she pried the metal tag from the doll's rigid plastic fingers. It came free with a faint snap. She didn't examine it, just shoved it deep into her pocket alongside the sample kit. She gave the doll one last look. Its pleading eyes seemed to follow her, then turned and hurried back towards shaft C4, her flashlight beam bouncing erratically. She reached the shaft, holstered the flashlight momentarily, and began the climb. Her arms burned, her gloves slick with grime, the repulsive smell clinging to her. Rung by agonizing rung, she ascended, forcing herself upward, away from the filth and the pleading eyes of the discarded doll. Nearly at the top, she heard it, not from below but from above. A faint scraping sound coming from the horizontal ductwork connected to the shaft, near the access hatch where Ray's guards were supposedly waiting. It wasn't the sound of boots or equipment. It was a familiar sound. The dragging, scrabbling sound of misshapen limbs on metal. Lyssa froze on the rungs, heart seizing. Had something else come down from the factory level? Or had something been waiting up here? She reached for her radio, hesitated. 3 clicks for abort extraction. But what if Ray's guards were already compromised? Slowly, cautiously, she climbed the last few rungs until her head was level with the shaft opening. The access hatch was still slightly ajar. Peering through the gap, she aimed her flashlight beam into the corridor outside. Not Ray's guards. Standing there, silhouetted against the dim corridor lights, was Foreman Grix. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 workers Lyssa didn't recognize, their faces grim, carrying heavy wrenches like clubs. And beside Grix, seemingly tethered by a crude energy leash held in the foreman's hand, was another Glitchling. This one was different from GR07. Smaller, leaner, disturbingly canine in its posture, with multiple jointed legs ending in sharp claws and a head dominated by a split, snapping jaw mechanism crafted from metal and polymer. It strained against the leash, emitting low, hungry clicks, its multifaceted eyes scanning the darkness within the shaft. Grix must have bypassed Ray's authority, rallied his own loyalists, perhaps using Vaughn's own creations scavenged from Gamma's rejects. He knew where she'd gone. He was waiting for her. Ray's diversion hadn't worked, or Grixt had anticipated it. Lyssa ducked back down slightly, extinguishing her light, pressing herself against the cold, slick wall of the shaft, trapped between the effluent below and Grixt's monstrous ambush above. Her radio felt heavy, useless. Extraction wasn't an option. Ray's was compromised or outmaneuvered. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Chapter 14. Converging Threats. Darkness and the stench of the shaft were Lyssa's only shield. Above, she could hear Grixt's low voice, muffled but menacing. Knew she'd double back. Rat in a trap. The glitchling tethered beside him emitted a series of sharp, eager clicks, its senses likely penetrating the darkness far better than human eyes. Lyssa held her breath, plastered against the cold, weeping wall, praying the slime and shadows would conceal her. The metal rungs felt impossibly slippery beneath her boots. She couldn't stay here. Grixt would either send the glitchling down or simply wait her out. Below lay the fetid drainage conduit, the pleading doll, and potentially worse horrors emerging from Gamma's depths. Retreat was not an option. Attack. Against Grixt, two armed thugs and a bioengineered monstrosity. Insanity. Think, had she bypassed any other access points on her way down, other connecting ducts. Her memory, fragmented by fear and haste, offered only darkness and dead ends. But wait. Halfway down the shaft, hadn't she noticed a smaller, circular side duct? Old, possibly disused. It was a desperate chance, but better than remaining pinned. Slowly, painstakingly, Lyssa began to descend again, moving without her light, relying on touch and muscle memory. Each tiny scrape of her boot, each shift of weight, sounded thunderous in her own ears. Above, the clicking of the glitchling seemed to follow her progress, its head likely cocked, listening. "Something's moving," one of Grixt's men muttered nervously. "Let it," Grixt growled. "Know where to go, keep the hatch covered, flush it out when Vaughn gives the word." Lyssa ignored them, focusing on the descent. Her hands found the corroded metal, felt the familiar shape of the rungs. Down, down into the oppressive dark, the stench intensifying again. She estimated the halfway point, straining her eyes against the blackness, feeling along the shaft wall with her free hand. There. A circular opening, barely large enough to squeeze through, covered by a flimsy, rusted mesh screen. Using the ceramic shard still miraculously tucked in her pocket, she carefully pried at the edge of the screen. Rusted metal flaked away, grating loudly. Lyssa froze. Silence from above. Had they heard? Apparently not. She continued working, carefully bending the fragile mesh outwards just enough to create an opening. Heart pounding, she swung her body across the shaft, grabbing the lower edge of the opening and awkwardly wriggled through, scraping her back and tearing her uniform. The duct beyond was tight, circular, coated in something thick and powdery that puffed up around her, choking her even through the respirator. Old insulation, dried chemical residue. Once inside, she pulled the bent mesh screen back as best she could, hopping to obscure the opening slightly. This duct was old, clearly not part of the main system Vaughn likely monitored. Where did it lead? She had no idea. Crawling blindly forward, enveloped in powdery darkness, felt like being buried alive. The air was stagnant, heavy. She moved by touch, the duct curving gently downwards. After crawling for what felt like an eternity in the claustrophobic tube, her outstretched hand touched not metal but rough, crumbling concrete. The duct ended, opening into a larger space. She cautiously eased herself forward, peering out. She seemed to be in a substructure, a forgotten space beneath the main factory floor. Old concrete foundations, massive pillars shrouded in darkness, the drip of unseen water echoing in the distance. The air was damp, earthy, blessedly free of the overpowering chemical stench, though overlaid with the smell of mold and decay. Faint light filtered down from ventilation slits high up near the ceiling, far above. Where was she? Was this beneath Sector Gamma, beneath the dormitories? Was it a way out? She swept the narrow beam of her flashlight cautiously around. Piles of discarded machinery lay rusting in corners. Cobwebs thick as shrouds hung from the ceiling. Tracks of some small animal, or perhaps something worse, marked the dusty floor. Suddenly, a low groan echoed from the far end of the space. Lyssa snapped off her light, pressing herself behind a crumbling concrete pillar, straining her ears. The groan came again, followed by a shuffling, dragging sound. Not mechanical, organic, and filled with pain. Was it another glitchling? Had something escaped Gamma and found its way down here? Gripping the ceramic shard tightly, Lyssa waited, listening. The shuffling sound grew closer, accompanied by ragged, difficult breathing. A figure emerged slowly into a patch of weak light filtering from above. Not a glitchling. It was human, or had been. Dressed in the tattered remnants of a gray factory uniform, the figure was stooped, emaciated, moving with agonizing slowness. One leg dragged uselessly. Patches of skin were discolored, marked with weeping sores and strange, crystalline growths. The figure's head was bowed, face hidden in shadow, but the sparse hair clinging to the scalp was matted with grime and blood. It shuffled past Lyssa's hiding place, seemingly unaware of her presence, focused only on its painful progress towards some unseen goal. As it moved into another patch of dim light, Lyssa saw its hands twisted, joints swollen, skin stretched taut over sharp bone, yet clutching something small and dark. The figure stumbled, catching itself against a pillar, and let out another low groan. Its head lolled sideways, revealing its face in profile for a fleeting moment. Lyssa's breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. Older, ravaged by suffering, and God knows what Vaughn's experiments or Gamma's toxic environment had done to him, but unmistakably. Leo, she whispered, the name barely audible. The figure froze. Slowly, stiffly, it turned its head towards the sound. The face that lifted towards her was a ruin. Scar tissue, chemical burns, the strange crystalline lesions marred familiar features. But the eyes, sunken, clouded with pain and confusion, they still held a flicker of recognition as they focused on Lyssa. Lie. The voice was a dry, cracked whisper, barely human. He took a step towards her, then faltered, his ruined leg giving way. He crumpled to the ground, breathing harsh, shallow gasps. The object he'd been clutching rolled from his grasp. It looked like a small, corroded access card. Lyssa rushed forward, forgetting her own danger, kneeling beside the ravaged form of her brother. "Leo, it's me. Lyssa, what happened to you? How did you get here?" Tears streamed down her face, cutting pathways through the grime. Leo coughed, a racking sound that shook his frail body. Gamma, rejects, tunnels, hiding. Each word was an agony. He reached out a trembling, disfigured hand, brushing her cheek. Saw, you, raise, he coughed again, harder this time. Trap, von, Grixt. He knew Ray's intervention might be a trap, or that Grixt was waiting. How? How did you know? Lyssa pleaded, gripping his hand. Corv, Leo whispered, helps, hides us, the broken ones. He gestured weakly towards the access card lying nearby. Service tunnels, map, escape. His breathing grew shallower, his eyes fluttering closed. Viable, Vaughn, needs, the core, sequence. Viable. Vaughn needed the core sequence. Had she flushed only non-essential tissue, keeping the vital genetic material, Leo himself, horrifically damaged but alive, hidden away, perhaps planning further experiments? Or had he escaped during decommissioning, aided by Corv? Leo, stay with me, Lyssa begged, shaking him gently. His eyes opened slightly, clouded with pain. Run, lie, sample, raise, trust, no one. His voice faded to a whisper. Take, card, go. His hand fell limp. His breathing stopped. No, Leo, Lyssa sobbed, clutching him, but there was no response. The faint spark of recognition was gone. The shallow rise and fall of his chest ceased. After months of searching, she had found her brother, only to lose him again in this forgotten, decaying underbelly of the factory. Grief washed over her, vast and crushing. But his last words echoed. Run, sample, raise, trust no one. Take card, go. Trust no one. Not even Ray's. Had Ray's intervention been a calculated move, part of a larger game? Was she just another player seeking control of Vaughn's horrific project? Lyssa didn't know. But Leo's warning, delivered with his dying breath, couldn't be ignored. Forcing down her grief, Lyssa gently pried Leo's fingers open. She retrieved the corroded access card. It looked old, possibly an outdated maintenance key. She tucked it securely away with the sample vials and the doll's tag. She had the sample. She had Leo's warning. She had a potential escape route via the service tunnels shown on the card's map, assuming she could find a reader, assuming the map was decipherable. But Grixt was still above, likely guarding the only obvious way out of the substructure via the shaft. She scanned the decaying space again with her flashlight. Were there other ways out, other vents, old tunnels? The dripping sound she'd heard earlier, where was it coming from? Following the sound, she moved deeper into the substructure, past rusting machinery, leaving Leo's still form lying in the dim light. The dripping led her to a far corner where moisture seeped down a concrete wall, pooling on the floor before disappearing into a grated drain. Looking up, she saw the source, a large, corroded discharge pipe embedded high in the wall, leaking steadily. It looked like part of the factory's external drainage system, perhaps carrying rainwater or graywater runoff towards the cliffs. It was easily wide enough to crawl through. Could this be a way out? A path leading outside the factory walls, bypassing Grixt, bypassing the main security net. It was another terrifying gamble. The pipe could be blocked. It could lead straight to a sheer drop off the cliffs. It could be filled with toxic sludge or nesting scuttler crabs. But it was a chance. A way to potentially honor Leo's last wish. Run. Go. She checked her gear, respirator tight, gloves secure, samples, card, tag safe, flashlight beam steady. Taking one last, mournful look back towards the shadows where Leo lay, Lyssa found a pile of debris she could use to climb towards the leaking pipe. The final escape attempt had begun. Chapter 15. Salt, Stone, and Silence. Climbing the pile of rusting, unstable debris was treacherous. Metal groaned and shifted under Lyssa's weight. Dust rained down. Twice, she nearly slipped, clinging desperately to corroded struts, the image of falling back onto the decaying concrete floor spurring her onwards. Finally, she reached the level of the leaking discharge pipe. It was wider than the ventilation ducts, easily 3 feet in diameter, constructed of thick, corroded metal. A steady trickle of relatively clean water, likely rainwater runoff mixed with non-hazardous factory discharge, flowed along the bottom, washing away some of the accumulated grime near the opening. Peering inside with her flashlight, she saw it sloped downwards, disappearing into darkness. No immediate obstructions were visible, but the damp walls were slick with algae and rust. It smelled of damp earth, rust, and the faint tang of the sea, a welcome change from the factory's chemical horrors. This was it, her only path forward that wasn't certain death. Taking a deep breath, steeling herself against the unknown, Lyssa crawled into the pipe's dark maw. The going was slow, slippery. The constant trickle of water made handholds precarious. She moved feet first, bracing herself with her hands, trying to control her descent down the gentle slope. The flashlight beam bounced ahead, revealing only the endless curve of corroded metal. The sounds from the substructure, the dripping water, the distant factory hum faded behind her, replaced by the gurgle of water in the pipe and the echo of her own movements. How far did it go? Did it truly lead outside? Or was it a trap funneling her into another waste processing unit, another dead end? Leo's warning, "Trust no one," echoed in her mind. Could Reyes have known about this pipe? Could Grixt be waiting at the other end? She pushed the thoughts away. Paranoia wouldn't help her now. Only forward motion mattered. The pipe began to curve more sharply downwards. The flow of water increased slightly. She could smell the sea more strongly now, hear a distant, rhythmic booming, waves crashing against rock. Hope surged, fragile but fierce. She was getting closer to the outside. The pipe leveled out, then ended abruptly. Lyssa cautiously shone her light ahead. She was looking out from an opening about halfway up a sheer cliff face. Below, maybe 50 feet down, jagged black rocks churned in violent gray surf. Above, the cliff soared upwards towards the overcast sky. There was no ledge, no path, just the pipe opening onto a vertical rock wall. Freedom was agonizingly close, yet impossibly far. Was this a dead end after all? Despair threatened to overwhelm her. She swept the flashlight beam across the cliff face near the pipe opening. The rock was slick with spray, offering few handholds. But then she saw them, small, dark shapes hammered into the rock at intervals, descending diagonally downwards towards a narrow, wave-cut ledge just above the reach of the highest tides. Old iron rungs, like the ones used inside the factory shafts, but ancient, rusted, placed here decades ago perhaps by original builders, or smugglers, or someone else who needed a secret way off the island. Could she risk it? The rungs looked treacherous, weakened by salt and time. One wrong move, one rusted rung giving way, meant falling onto the rocks below, certain death. But staying in the pipe meant eventual discovery by Grixt or starvation. It was the cliff face or nothing. Securing her flashlight to her belt, angling the beam downwards, she took a deep breath, tasted the salt spray on her lips. She reached out, testing the first iron rung near the pipe opening. It felt cold, rough, but seemed solid enough. Steeling her nerves, Lyssa swung herself out of the pipe, feet searching for purchase on the slick rock, hands gripping the first rung tightly. The wind whipped around her, tearing at her clothes, threatening to pull her from her precarious hold. The roar of the surf below was deafening. Carefully, deliberately, she began the descent, moving one limb at a time, testing each rung before putting her full weight on it. Some were alarmingly loose, coated in rust that flaked off in her gloved hands. Twice, small chunks of rock crumbled away near her feet. She didn't look down, focusing only on the next handhold, the next foothold. Her muscles screaming with the strain, her body slick with sweat and sea spray. Slowly, agonizingly, she made her way down the diagonal line of rungs. The narrow ledge grew closer, just a few more feet. The last rung felt particularly unstable. She eased onto it, held her breath, then reached with her foot for the ledge. Solid rock. She scrambled onto the narrow strip of safety, collapsing against the cold cliff face, gasping for air, trembling uncontrollably. She had made it. Out of the factory, out of the pipes. She was outside, exposed to the elements but free from the immediate grasp of Vaughn and Grixt. The ledge was barely 3 feet wide, slick with spray, pounded by the wind, but it felt like paradise. She looked back up. The pipe opening seemed impossibly high now, a dark eye weeping water onto the cliff. There was no sign of pursuit. Following the narrow ledge, she saw it curved around a rocky promontory, potentially leading towards a less precipitous part of the island's coast, away from the factory complex perched above. Before moving on, Lyssa took out the items from her pocket. The sealed sample vials, her proof against Vaughn, Leo's morbid legacy. The corroded access card from Leo, potentially useless now but a memento. And the small metal tag pried from the hand of the broken doll in the drainage conduit. She looked at it closely for the first time. It wasn't an ID tag. Etched onto its surface was a single, complex symbol, not factory markings, not human language. It was alien, geometric, disturbingly familiar from the brief glimpse she'd had of Vaughn's monitor displays detailing Project Chimera's core programming. Had the broken doll been trying to give her a warning, a clue about the off-world partners? She secured the items again. Survival first. She started moving along the ledge, pressing herself flat against the rock face, inching her way around the promontory. The wind howled, the waves crashed below. As she rounded the point, the factory came back into view, further away now, clinging to the cliffs like a monstrous gray parasite. She saw figures moving on the clifftop near the perimeter fence. Search parties. Grixt's men. She ducked lower, trying to blend into the rock. But then she saw something else. Movement near the crude dock where the ferry arrived. A small boat, not the usual ferry, bobbing in the turbulent water. Figures were loading crates onto it. Was it a supply run or something else? As she watched, squinting against the spray, she saw a figure detach itself from the group and walk towards the edge of the dock, looking out towards the sea, then back towards the factory. Tall, slender, wearing white. Dr. Vaughn. She had escaped the lab, subdued the glitchling, reasserted control, or was she fleeing? The boat looked small, fast, capable of reaching the mainland independently. Was Vaughn abandoning the fractured facility, taking crucial research or finished vessels with her? Lyssa watched, hidden on the narrow ledge, clutching the samples that could expose Vaughn, yet powerless to stop her departure. The boat's engine revved, louder now even over the surf. Vaughn turned and climbed aboard. The boat pulled away from the dock, turning its bow towards the open sea, quickly becoming a small speck against the vast gray expanse. Had Vaughn won, escaped with her secrets, her alien project potentially continuing elsewhere? Or was this just another move in a larger game? Lyssa didn't know. She looked down at the sample vials, then back towards the distant, receding boat. She thought of Leo, dying in the darkness beneath the factory. She thought of the glitchling, the waiting dolls, the broken figure in the drain pipe clutching the alien symbol. Ray's ambiguous intervention. Corv's cryptic help. Getting off the island was the priority. Reaching the mainland. Getting the samples analyzed, exposing Viridian dynamics, Vaughn, Project Chimera. Leo's warning, trust no one, felt heavier now. Ray's might be an opportunist. Viridian Command might simply cover everything up, burying the truth along with the victims. Lyssa continued along the ledge, which gradually widened, leading towards a steep, scree-covered slope that descended to a small, stony cove hidden from the factory's view. Escape from the island wouldn't be easy. She had no supplies, no communication other than the useless radio. She was alone, hunted, carrying a terrible burden of proof and grief. But she was alive. She was free from the factory's immediate confines. The salt spray on her face felt real, the wind harsh but cleansing. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. Looking out at the turbulent gray sea, the mainland a distant, unseen promise, Lyssa started down the scree slope, the weight of the sample vials, the access card, and the alien tag heavy in her pocket. The silence of the cove awaited, a temporary sanctuary before the next stage of the nightmare. The end.